Welcome to The Tired Thinker, where curiosity lingers and questions refuse to settle. Tonight's ache belongs to the paradox of identity, the riddle of what makes us who we are. The ship of Theseus asks, if every part of a thing is replaced piece by piece, does it remain the same ship? And if not, when did it stop being itself? We ask the same of our own minds. If every thought, habit, and memory changes, am I still me? Or just the echo of what I was? These aren't puzzles to solve, but mirrors to stand before, slowly, to feel the quiet shift of being and the ache of impermanence. So tonight, we'll drift through the paradox gently. No rush, no answers, just awareness of how fragile I really is. Before we begin, where are you listening from? What time is it in your small, wondering corner of the world? If this space helps you think softly, I'd be grateful if you liked or subscribed, so more thinkers can find their way here. Now, let's begin. Imagine standing at the edge of the sea. You step into the waves and they move around you, changing shape every second. You know it's the same ocean, yet no single drop is ever the same. The water you touch now wasn't here a moment ago. The ship of Theseus begins in that same quiet confusion. If you rebuild a ship piece by piece until nothing of the original remains, is it still the same ship? The question sounds simple, but it presses against something deeply human. When every cell in our body replaces itself, when memories fade and habits die, what stays the same? What is the fragile constant that lets us say with quiet confidence, I am still me? A person isn't like a ship made of wooden planks, but the idea holds. You can change your job, your beliefs, your body, your name. You might even forget who you were in detail, yet you still feel like you. Maybe not always. Maybe you wake some mornings and feel like a stranger in your own life. But somewhere inside, there's a thread of recognition, small and steady. It's what makes you answer when someone calls your name. It's what makes your childhood photos feel both familiar and distant. You know it's you, even if you can't prove it. Consider how memory works. It's unreliable. Every time you recall an event, your brain rewrites it a little. The story changes, but it still belongs to you. You are the narrator who keeps telling it. That narration might be the fragile constant, not the details, but the act of remembering at all. The voice that says, this is my story, may be the only thing that never truly changes. Yet even that voice shifts with time. A 10-year-old's idea of self sounds nothing like a 40-year-old's. It's not one fixed thing, but a continuous one, like a flame passed from candle to candle. Each burns differently, but the fire persists. Let's take a small example. You find a box of old letters written by your younger self. You read them, and something stirs, recognition mixed with disbelief. You remember the feelings, but not the person who felt them. You know what they wanted, what they feared, yet you also see how far you've drifted. That distance between who you were and who you are is both real and unreal. It's the paradox of continuity. The same you is reading those words, but also not the same at all. You've been rebuilt, thought by thought, year by year. Biology agrees. The cells in your body are not the ones you were born with. Bones renew over decades, skin every few weeks. Even the neurons in your brain change their connections. You are not physically the same being you once were. Still, Your mind insists there's a line connecting all versions of you, a kind of psychological signature. It's not in the matter itself, but in the pattern. The way those cells and connections arrange into a story that feels ongoing. You are not the ship. You are the design that the ship keeps rebuilding around. But what happens when that design fractures? Imagine someone with amnesia who forgets their name, their family, their past. Are they still the same person? If identity depends on memory, then losing it seems like losing the self. Yet the body remains, breathing, blinking, moving through the world. Friends say, "You're still you." The person living inside says, "I don't know who that is." Both statements are true. The fragile constant bends, but does not break. It hides in the way we respond to the world, in our patterns of reaction. How we love, how we fear, how we make sense of pain. The ship of Theseus forces us to ask whether identity is found in structure or substance. A ship rebuilt plank by plank is not the same wood, but it has the same shape, the same idea. If someone used the discarded planks to build another ship, which would be the original? The one that stayed in the harbor, or the one made of the same old wood? Maybe the question is wrong. Maybe original is a story we tell to make change easier to accept. We need continuity because without it, existence feels like a series of unconnected moments, a slideshow without motion. The mind wants to stitch those frames together into one life. Stitching is the fragile constant. Now think of yourself in transition, moving to a new city, ending a relationship, starting over. These moments feel like small deaths. The version of you who lived in that place, who loved that person, no longer exists. And yet, you move forward with their memories. You carry their fears, their jokes, their playlists. You are their continuation, not their replacement. Like the ship, you sail on, rebuilt but recognizable. The paradox softens when we see that identity isn't about holding still, but about moving through time without losing coherence. You can change completely as long as the pattern of change makes sense to you. Sometimes, though, the pattern breaks. Trauma, illness, deep grief, these things can shatter the thread of self. You might wake up and not recognize the person you've become. The fragile constant feels lost then, but maybe it's only quieter. It lives in the will to rebuild, to name yourself again. Even after destruction, there's a faint impulse to continue, to assemble a self from the fragments left behind. That impulse might be the most essential part of being human. The ship repairs itself because it must. There's also the matter of perception. Other people see you through time, and they anchor your identity when you can't. They say, "You've changed," or "You're still the same at heart." They notice the constants, a smile, a way of speaking, the tilt of your head. They remind you of who you were, and in doing so, they help keep your continuity intact. Maybe identity isn't a solo project. Maybe it's a shared construction, held together by memory, biology, and the stories others tell about us. Technology adds another layer. Photos, posts, messages, they preserve digital versions of you long after you've changed. Look back at a post from 10 years ago, and it feels alien, but that archive insists you're still the same person who wrote it. The internet doesn't understand the ship of Theseus. It keeps every plank you've ever been. The self online becomes a fossil, a record of identities that no longer exist. And yet, even there, you see the thread, a tone, a thought pattern, a familiar question that lingers across the years. It's eerie but grounding. Philosophers like Heraclitus said you can't step in the same river twice. The water changes, and so do you. The point isn't to freeze the river, but to recognize that movement is identity. The fragile constant isn't a solid core, it's a rhythm. The beat stays steady even as the notes evolve. When you think about yourself, you change yourself, not into someone new, but into the next iteration of the same unfolding pattern. You are the ship mid-repair, sailing as you're rebuilt. So what's left to hold when everything shifts? Maybe it's the awareness of shifting itself, the gentle knowledge that you are process, not product, that you are both the builder and the built. The fragile constant is not an object, not a soul, not even a memory. It's the act of noticing, of saying, "This is me," in every new form that arises. You were never meant to stay the same. The ship was always meant to sail. Think of your life as a long piece of fabric. Each year adds new color, texture, and pattern. Some parts wear thin, others shine brighter. You may change jobs, lose friends, move cities, or shift beliefs. Yet when you look back, there's a sense of connection running through it all. Something links the child you were, the person you are now, and the one you will become. That connection isn't made of memory alone. It's something quieter, harder to name, the thread that remains. Imagine two people meeting after 20 years apart. They've both aged, lived, and changed in ways they couldn't have imagined. Still, after a few minutes, the old rhythm returns. The laughter sounds the same. The pauses feel familiar. They both sense the shared thread, even if everything else has shifted. The bodies, jobs, and circumstances differ, but something in their tone, in the way they understand each other, stays consistent. It's not about what they remember. It's about how they are. That same kind of continuity lives inside each of us. The brain helps build that line. It organizes memories into a story that feels linear, even when it isn't. Each time you recall a moment, your mind rewrites it a little to fit who you are now. You smooth the edges, connect pieces that never met, and fill gaps with meaning. You're editing a story while living it. The thread isn't truth in the factual sense. It's coherence. It's what lets you say, "That was me," even if you barely recognize the person in the memory. The ship of Theseus works the same way. Replace every plank, and it's still called the same ship because the idea of the ship remains intact. That idea is the thread. Sometimes the line becomes hard to see. After a breakup, a loss, or a major change, you may feel cut off from who you were. You might say, "I don't know myself anymore." But even in that disconnection, the thread still runs underneath. It's in how you react to pain, how you reach for comfort, how you try to rebuild. The pattern is yours, even when you can't see it clearly. The sense of being the same person isn't about holding everything constant. It's about how each version of you picks up where the last one left off, even if the direction changes. Consider a photograph from your childhood. You stare at it, trying to remember what it felt like to be that small person. The details are gone, but something in the gaze, the posture, or the half smile feels familiar. You can't define it, but you know it. That recognition is the thread, the way your being continues through time without needing to stay identical. The continuity doesn't depend on the body, or even on clear memory. It lives in the pattern of how you move through the world. Biology supports this idea. Your cells renew, your neurons shift connections, but your nervous system carries forward the blueprint of how you respond to life. You keep habits, emotional reflexes, and learned responses that link you to earlier versions of yourself. The continuity isn't physical, it's functional. You might say the code of you runs on new hardware, but the logic stays the same. You can see this in everyday life. Someone who once feared speaking in public becomes a confident teacher, but their attention to detail and care for others remains. A person who once sought approval now values solitude, yet still chases meaning in what they do. Change looks total, but the motives, the tone of thought, the rhythm of being, they carry through. The thread adapts but never vanishes. Even in confusion or doubt, the thread holds. When people go through illness or memory loss, families often notice flashes of the old self, a familiar expression, a phrase, a small gesture. It's fragile, but it's there. It suggests that identity isn't a single state, but a trace, like a watermark across time. You can't always see it, but it shapes every version of you. The thread that remains isn't about resisting change. It's about recognizing the quiet line that allows change to happen without breaking you. You are the collection of your transformations, tied together by something you don't need to name to feel. You've carried it from the beginning, and you'll carry it still, through every version yet to come. Change often feels like loss before it feels like growth. You move through life collecting experiences, beliefs, and habits that seem to define you. Over time, some of them stop fitting. You shed them, sometimes by choice, sometimes because life pries them away. The process feels like breaking, but it's actually how you uncover what lasts. To become yourself, you often have to let go of what you thought yourself was. Think about how a snake sheds its skin. The old layer doesn't fall away all at once. It loosens slowly until it splits, leaving behind a thin shell of what once was. The creature underneath isn't new, it's simply unburdened. Humans do this too, only we shed in less visible ways. We leave behind versions of ourselves when we move, end relationships, or outgrow the roles that once made us feel secure. Each time we do, we feel exposed, unsure of who we are without the things that used to define us. Imagine someone who has spent years building an identity around their job. They introduce themselves by their title, measure their worth by performance, and shape their days around work. When they lose that job, it feels like a piece of the self disappears. The routines collapse, the confidence wavers, the world feels unfamiliar. But after the panic fades, something quieter appears. They notice what still feels steady: curiosity, kindness, the need to create, the desire to connect. The loss didn't erase them, it revealed what stayed when the label fell away. That's becoming by unbecoming. In philosophy, the ship of Theseus asks whether something remains the same after all its parts are replaced. It's easy to focus on the parts, the planks, the nails, the sails, but the ship isn't defined by its pieces. It's defined by its purpose. A ship remains a ship because it continues to sail. The same is true for people. You are not the sum of your changing parts, but the continuity of your direction, the quiet movement toward meaning, whatever form it takes. We resist unbecoming because it feels like failure. Letting go sounds like giving up. Yet holding too tightly to a fixed idea of yourself creates friction. It keeps you trapped in old versions of identity that no longer make sense. Think of an actor stuck playing the same role long after the story ends. The audience has moved on, but the performance continues out of habit. It's exhausting. Unbecoming is how you step off that stage and return to something real. Memory makes this difficult. It builds a narrative that tells you who you are. A student, a friend, a parent, a dreamer. You carry these roles as proof of continuity, but they can turn into cages if you mistake them for essence. When one of those roles disappears, It can feel like erasure, but underneath, the same awareness watches. The same pattern of attention, the same way of feeling the world. That awareness doesn't belong to any single version of you. It's what survives them all. You can see this in smaller moments too. Think about cleaning out a room. You pick up old clothes, books, notes, and photos. Some spark joy, others carry the weight of who you used to be. You hesitate before throwing them out, not because you need them, but because they remind you of a self that once felt certain. You keep a few, but most go. Afterward, the space feels lighter. You can breathe again. That physical act mirrors the inner one. You make room by letting go. You find what still matters because the noise around it is gone. In relationships, unbecoming happens when you stop performing the version of yourself someone else expects. Maybe you were the caretaker, the problem solver, the quiet one. You learned those roles because they made you belong. But belonging built on pretending is fragile. The moment you start telling the truth about what you want, what you fear, what you no longer believe, the old role cracks. Some people step back, others draw closer. The self that emerges isn't new, it's uncovered. Even the body teaches this lesson. As we age, physical abilities fade. Endurance, speed, or beauty, whatever we once took pride in, shifts. It can feel like losing identity, yet something steady remains beneath the surface changes. The person who once ran fast might now move slower, but still loves motion. The one who once chased goals might now savor quiet. The outer form changes, the core impulse endures. That endurance is not about youth or strength. It's about awareness, the same attention that has watched every version of your life unfold. A kind of honesty in unbecoming. It strips away what's unnecessary. It forces you to face yourself without decoration. Many spiritual traditions speak of this as emptying, a process of peeling away layers until only the essential remains. It's not about asceticism or detachment, but clarity. When you lose what you thought defined you, you start to see the difference between identity and essence. Identity is the costume. Essence is the actor beneath it. At times, unbecoming isn't gentle. It comes through heartbreak, illness, or failure. You don't choose it, but it changes you. In the quiet that follows loss, you might notice a strange steadiness. Even stripped of what you loved or believed, something continues. You breathe, you notice, you reach. The act of noticing itself becomes proof that you endure. The ship keeps sailing, even after the storm. To become isn't to add more, it's to uncover what has always been there. You lose a part of yourself, and what's left stands in sharper relief. The process isn't comfortable, but it's honest. Every time you shed an old layer, the thread of your continuity pulls tighter. The self that remains may look smaller, simpler, quieter, but it's closer to truth. And in that simplicity, you find the strength to begin again. You carry more versions of yourself than you realize. Some are loud, others barely whisper, but they all live somewhere in you. They appear when you smell something familiar, hear an old song, or visit a place you used to know. You feel a sudden pull, not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. The moment blurs the present and the past. You stand in two times at once, aware of the person you were and the one you've become. Those echoes are the ghosts of your earlier selves, still moving quietly beneath your surface. Everyone has them. The child who once believed the world was endless still hides in your laughter. The teenager who wanted to be understood still shapes how you argue or defend yourself. The young adult who tried to prove something still pushes when no one is watching. These ghosts don't haunt you out of malice. They linger because identity doesn't vanish, it layers. You don't stop being who you were, you build on it. Every version leaves fingerprints on the next. Think about a time you made a choice that changed your direction. Maybe you left a relationship, switched careers, or stopped chasing someone else's idea of success. When you look back, it can feel like a stranger made that decision. You might even say, "I don't recognize that person anymore." But if you listen closely, that version of you still speaks. The reasoning, the fear, the hope behind the choice still exist in the way you make decisions now. You may have grown past the details, but not the structure. The ghost doesn't disappear, it evolves. Memory is the bridge that keeps these older selves alive. It edits and reshapes the past, but the emotion remains. You might not remember every event from a particular year, yet you remember how that year felt, the tone, the weight, the mood. That feeling stays in your nervous system. It shapes how you respond to similar things later. The child who is praised for being quiet might grow into an adult who avoids attention. The young worker who was punished for mistakes might grow cautious, even when there's no reason. The past self whispers through reactions that seem automatic. These ghosts also show up in dreams. You dream of old classrooms, houses, and people you haven't seen in years. The setting may not make sense, but the feeling does. Dreams pull forgotten selves into view. They remind you that your mind keeps every version in storage. Each one was real once, and part of you still reaches back to check if they're okay. It's a strange kind of loyalty, a quiet check-in with the people you used to be. Sometimes these echoes hurt. You might think about a mistake you made long ago and feel the same shame you did then. The memory replays like a scene you can't edit. Rationally, you know it's over, but your body reacts as if it's still happening. That's how ghosts behave. They repeat what's unresolved. When you haven't forgiven your past self, they keep knocking. They want acknowledgement, not erasure. Facing them means saying, "I remember you. I know why you did that. I understand." That simple act can quiet the echo. The opposite can happen too. You might miss an old version of yourself, the one who was more daring, more curious, more open. You wonder where they went. You feel dull in comparison, like you lost some essential spark. But that spark didn't die, it adapted. You grew cautious because life asked for it. You became careful where you once rushed in. The ghost you miss isn't gone. It's folded into the layers of who you are now. Sometimes it needs an invitation to return, not as a replacement, but as a reminder of possibility. Think about how music can open a door to those layers. A song from years ago plays, and suddenly you're back in that car, that room, that version of life. The melody feels like muscle memory. You hum along and feel the past self stir, not fully alive, but present enough to remind you that time doesn't erase, it accumulates. The same happens with scent, handwriting, or even the way light falls through a window. Small triggers that wake old versions. The ghosts are never far. In some ways, they keep you honest. They remind you of your origins. They show how far you've moved and what patterns repeat. The friend who betrayed you at 16 taught you to notice warning signs. The failure in your 20s taught you humility. The heartbreak in your 30s taught you patience. Each left a trace, shaping how you navigate the present. You might think of yourself as one person, but you are really a collection, a council of ghosts negotiating who speaks loudest today. Psychology calls this continuity of identity. But that phrase sounds colder than it feels. In real life, it's more like a conversation across time. The current you holds a dialogue with the past you, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with irritation. When you catch yourself saying, "I should have known better," it's one version talking to another. But the truth is, that earlier version didn't know. They hadn't yet become you. You exist because they tried. There's comfort in recognizing these ghosts. They mean you've lived. Every mistake, every joy, every lost dream leaves an imprint that continues in quiet ways. You might not be able to visit those versions again, but you can listen when they speak. You can thank them for carrying you this far. The person you are now is not their replacement. You are their continuation. The echoes stay, not to hold you back, but to remind you that even as you change, you are still made of everything you've ever been. Your life, like any long story, contains gaps, rewrites, and contradictions. You remember certain moments clearly, and others blur into fragments. Sometimes the details don't match. You tell a story one way and later realize it didn't happen quite like that. You mix timelines, confuse people, or leave things out without meaning to. Yet even with these errors, the story still feels real. It's not accuracy that gives it truth, it's coherence. You build meaning from memory, not data. The mind wants a through line, even when the facts don't line up. Memory doesn't work like a recording. It's closer to a script in constant revision. Each time you recall something, you edit it a little, cutting, adding, adjusting tone. The change feels natural, so you don't notice it. Over years, the story drifts from the original event, but the emotion stays the same. That emotion becomes the anchor of truth. You remember how you felt, not what exactly happened. The result is a continuity error that feels sincere. You aren't lying, you're preserving coherence. Imagine someone describing their childhood home. They say the house was painted yellow, that the front door creaked, that the smell of bread filled the kitchen. Years later, a photo shows the house was blue, the door new, and no one in the family baked. Still, the memory feels right. The mind filled in details that matched the feeling of warmth and safety. It wasn't about color or sound. It was about what those things represented. The story shifted, but the truth underneath didn't. These small inconsistencies exist everywhere. You remember being braver than you were, or maybe more afraid. You picture people standing where they never stood. You smooth out conflicts, shorten long silences, or turn chaos into order. In doing so, you turn experience into narrative. Without that editing, life would feel scattered, a stream of unconnected moments. The continuity error isn't a flaw. It's how the mind makes a livable story. Sometimes, though, those errors clash with other people's memories. You recall a shared event, and they swear it happened differently. The disagreement can feel jarring. Both of you believe you're right, because in your own stories, you are. Each of you stored the emotional truth, not the literal one. The tension reveals how personal identity depends on narrative. Who you think you are comes from the version of events you carry. When the story shifts, the self trembles. This happens in subtle ways too. You might think of yourself as someone patient until you notice moments of sharp anger. Or you believe you've always disliked something, only to find an old note proving you once loved it. The discovery feels like a contradiction, a small break in your continuity. You pause and think, which version is real? The answer is both. You're a composite of all the versions that ever existed. The continuity errors are the seams where growth happened. Films and books have continuity errors too. A cup moves between cuts. A shirt changes color. A prop appears and disappears. Viewers notice, but the story still works. The human brain forgives small inconsistencies as long as the emotional arc remains intact. Life functions the same way. You accept a degree of mismatch between what happened and what you believe happened because it allows the story to keep moving. The goal isn't precision, it's coherence. You can test this by reading an old diary. The person who wrote it may seem foreign. They sound certain about things you now question. They speak in absolutes that no longer make sense, yet you recognize the tone, the rhythm, the early outline of who you've become. You can see how you filled in the blanks over time, reshaping the story to make it fit your current understanding. It's not deception, it's adaptation. The past becomes part of the present through editing. Psychologists call this narrative identity. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are, built from selective memory. It helps you feel stable even when life changes. Without it, experience would feel fragmented, but it also means your self-concept depends on constant revision. Every new experience edits the previous chapters. You reframe losses as lessons, failures as turning points, relationships as necessary or fated. These reinterpretations introduce continuity errors, yet they also create meaning. Take a moment when something painful happened, maybe the end of a friendship. At first, the story was about betrayal or confusion. Years later, you tell it differently. It was about growth, boundaries, or self-respect. The facts didn't change, but your role did. You became the narrator who learned, not the character who suffered. That's the continuity error that keeps your story alive. It protects you from being trapped in one interpretation. There's also a kind of mercy in this process. It allows forgiveness. When you rewrite a painful memory to include understanding or context, you create space to move on. You soften the edges without denying the reality. You allow the ghost of the moment to rest. That's not dishonesty, it's healing. The story evolves so the self can keep existing in peace with it. But continuity errors can also cause unease. When your story doesn't match your actions, a gap opens. You might think of yourself as honest, but catch yourself avoiding the truth. Where you see a photo that doesn't fit the image you hold of who you were. The dissonance feels uncomfortable. It pushes you to reconcile the version you believe with the evidence in front of you. That process is where growth happens, in the tension between truth and belief. The ship of Theseus asks whether a thing that changes piece by piece remains the same. The continuity error is that paradox in narrative form. You revise your story constantly, yet still feel like the same protagonist. The plot may twist, the scenery change, but the tone, the sense of I, stays recognizable. Even when memory contradicts itself, you remain the author. The story doesn't have to align perfectly to feel true. It only has to make sense to the one living it.
A name is supposed to point to a person, but names outlive people all the time. They appear on mail long after someone has moved away. They stay printed on plaques, in memories, in digital profiles that keep glowing after the person behind them has gone quiet. The body changes, the mind evolves, the story drifts, yet the name stays still. It becomes a marker that keeps the shape of someone who is already changed beyond recognition. You use your name every day without thinking about it. You write it on forms, sign it on screens, hear it called in rooms. It feels like a simple label, but it carries every version of you inside it. Think about the way it sounds in different mouths, a teacher's, a lover's, a stranger's. The same syllables, but each carries a different weight. To one, your name means trust. To another, disappointment. To you, it means familiarity. Over time, that same word gathers layers, until it represents not a single person, but a trail of selves. When you were a child, your name meant possibility. It held your family's hope, their image of who you might become. As you grew, it started to mean something else, to teachers, to friends, to people who watched you fail or succeed. Each person stored a different version of you inside that same sound. Your identity stretched across all those perceptions. You existed in their minds as distinct stories, all anchored to your name. Even if you changed completely, those stories wouldn't. That's how the name outlives the essence. Imagine finding an old letter addressed to yourself. You recognize the handwriting and the name, but the person it was written to doesn't exist anymore. The fears, the goals, the tone, they belong to someone else who used to live in your body. Still, the letter finds you. The postal system doesn't know you've changed. That's how identity works. Society remembers the version that fits the label. The rest, the private growth, the inner shifts, stay invisible. The name becomes a kind of shell that remains even after the occupant moves on. The ship of Theseus lives inside this problem. If every plank is replaced, it's still called the same ship. The name gives it continuity. Without it, the ship would just be wood in motion. Your life follows the same logic. The name you carry binds all your transformations together. It convinces others, and sometimes you, that the person signing it is the same one who started long ago. But if you look closer, the link between the name and the self feels thinner than it seems. Consider what happens when someone changes their name. It can be a reclaiming, a rejection, or a rebirth. They may take on a new name to match who they've become, or who they wish to be. The old name still exists in records, in other people's memories, in old photos and emails. It doesn't vanish. It becomes a ghost version, a name that refers to someone who no longer answers to it. You can feel the split between the two. The person has moved forward, but language lags behind. The persistence of a name is both comfort and burden. Comfort because it ties your life together. Burden because it can trap you in an identity that no longer fits. People often say, "You've changed," but the name doesn't. It gives them a shortcut for recognition. They see the word and think they know the person. You might smile politely, realizing they're greeting a memory. The name remains, but the essence has drifted. This happens with public figures too. We remember names, artists, thinkers, leaders, long after the person has disappeared. We use their names to stand in for ideas or values, not people. Einstein becomes a synonym for intelligence, Cleopatra for power, Kafka for unease. The names survive, but the essence, the full, complicated human being, fades into symbol. That process doesn't only happen to the famous. In smaller ways, it happens to everyone. After you leave a job, a neighborhood, or a friendship, the version of you that people remember freezes in time. They'll say, "That sounds like you," when it no longer does. Technology intensifies this separation. Your name lingers online long after you've moved on. Old posts, profiles, and messages remain like static photographs of outdated selves. You can scroll back and see versions of yourself preserved by timestamp. Some make you proud, others make you cringe. You see how much you've changed, yet each post still carries your name. The system treats all versions as equal. In that digital mirror, the name feels immortal, and you feel replaceable within it. There's a scene that happens often when people reconnect after many years. They say each other's names like a spell. "It's you," as if the name could restore what time has worn away. The sound triggers recognition, but only briefly. Then comes the pause, the small awkwardness of realizing you're not the same. The name brought you together, but it can't account for the difference. That moment shows how fragile the connection between label and being really is. Philosophers once argued that names hold essence, that to know the true name of something was to know its nature. But the longer you live, the more you see how names lag behind essence. They capture identity as it once was, not as it is. Still, you need them. Without a name, you become invisible in language. The world needs a handle to hold you by, even if it only grips the outer shell. You can sense this gap most clearly in grief. When someone dies, their name continues. People speak it, write it, carve it into stone. The name becomes the vessel for what's left. The person is gone, but their sound remains, on lips, in memories, in records. You can't speak their essence, so you speak their name instead. Over time, that name gathers meaning beyond the individual. It stands for love, loss, history. It outlives the essence because that's what language does. It keeps pointing even after the thing it points to has changed. Your own name will do the same. It will keep showing up in messages, in stories, in other people's memories, long after you've become someone else entirely. That persistence is strange, but necessary. The name tells the world you exist, even when you no longer match it. It keeps the thread unbroken, holding the outline of a person who has already moved on.
Most of us like to believe there's a single, steady version of ourselves moving through time, one core I that stays the same from childhood to old age. We use that belief to make sense of experience. It helps us build stories, take responsibility, and recognize ourselves in mirrors. But when you look closer, that feeling of wholeness begins to crack. You realize that the self you depend on is not one thing at all. It's a mosaic of shifting parts, roles, memories, moods, reactions, held together by habit and narrative. The wholeness feels real because we keep repeating it, not because it truly exists. Imagine a person waking up in the morning. Before breakfast, they're a parent helping a child get ready for school. An hour later, they're a worker answering emails, calm and polite. At lunch, they laugh with friends, loosen up, speak differently. In the evening, they're quiet, withdrawn, thinking about something that hurt years ago. Each moment feels authentic, yet none of them completely defines who they are. The person doesn't notice the shifts because the mind smooths the transitions. It edits the fragments into a story that says, "This is me." But what if the editing is the illusion? Psychologists study this through what's called the modular mind, the idea that the brain isn't one unified voice, but a collection of modules, each handling a task: memory, emotion, decision-making, impulse control. These systems don't always agree. You might plan to eat healthy, then reach for dessert anyway. One part of you wants control, another wants pleasure. The argument happens inside, and afterward you tell yourself a story about choice. You say, "I decided to treat myself," even though that decision was the compromise of competing fragments. The illusion of wholeness keeps you from feeling like a crowd of impulses. It gives the chaos a single name. Memory strengthens this illusion. When you recall your past, you don't see the thousands of small selves you've been. You see a continuous line. The gaps are filled automatically, like how the eye fills in blind spots. The brain doesn't like disconnection. It edits the fragments together, turning years of contradiction into one consistent person. You forget how often you've changed your mind, how many identities you've worn, how much you've contradicted yourself. The editing isn't deceitful, it's protective. It lets you move through the world without freezing under the weight of inconsistency. You can see this illusion when life breaks your routine. A major change, a loss, a move, a betrayal, exposes how unstable the sense of self can be. You might say, "I don't feel like myself anymore." But what does that mean? Which self are you missing? The confident one? The optimistic one? The one who hadn't been hurt yet? You feel fractured because the old arrangement of fragments doesn't fit the new world. Eventually, a new version forms, with different pieces at the center. You call it healing, but it's also reassembly. The illusion of wholeness reboots, and you start believing again that you found yourself. Think about the language we use. We say, "I'm not myself today," as if there's a single correct version that went missing. Or we say, "I've changed," as though a permanent self morphed into another shape. But maybe there's no main character at all. Maybe the self is a performance stitched together from everything you've been and everything you're trying to be. When you speak to your boss, one set of fragments takes the lead. When you speak to your oldest friend, another does. The consistency you feel isn't in the fragments themselves. It's in the rhythm of switching between them. The ship of Theseus describes the same puzzle with wood instead of flesh. Replace each plank of a ship, one by one, until nothing of the original remains. Is it still the same ship? Most people say yes, because the form, a function, and the name continue. The illusion of wholeness works the same way. Each thought, memory, and belief gets replaced over time, yet the outline remains. You answer to the same name, live in the same body, and tell stories that connect it all. That outline convinces you of continuity, even as everything inside it shifts. There are moments when the illusion breaks, during grief, trauma, or introspection. You look at an old photograph and feel the gap between who you were and who you are. The distance feels impossible to cross. That earlier self had dreams, fears, and desires that no longer belong to you, yet you still call them yours. You use the same pronoun, I, to refer to both. Language glues the fragments together, even when they don't fit. You talk about my past as if it belongs to the same person who's speaking now. The grammar hides the truth. There isn't one consistent I, only a sequence of selves sharing the same name tag. Consider how memory disorders reveal this illusion. In certain types of amnesia, a person can lose large parts of their past, yet still feel like themselves. In others, they remember everything, but lose the emotional link to those memories. They know their story, but feel detached from it. Both cases show that identity isn't just memory or feeling. It's the fragile sense of connection between them. When that connection breaks, the illusion of wholeness falters. You see the fragments for what they are. Moments, not essence. Everyday life keeps you from noticing this. Routine rebuilds the illusion constantly. You wake up in the same bed, use the same name, repeat familiar habits. Each repetition says, "This is who I am." But underneath, thoughts shift, opinions evolve, feelings change tone. Even your physical body replaces its cells over time. You're rebuilt molecule by molecule, yet you feel continuous. The wholeness you sense isn't biological or psychological, it's narrative. You are the story that links the fragments, not the fragments themselves. This illusion isn't wrong. It's what makes human life possible. Without it, every change would feel like a small death. The mind keeps the story intact so you can move forward without falling apart. Still, it's worth noticing how fragile it is. When you pause and listen closely, you can almost hear the seams, the quiet shifts between moods, roles, and memories. You can sense the fragments swapping places, and for a moment, you see it clearly. The self isn't a solid shape, but a moving pattern stitched together from everything that's ever passed through you. Every morning, you wake up and call yourself by the same name, as if that makes you the same person you were yesterday. You brush your teeth, make coffee, check messages, and move through the world under a label that feels solid. It gives the illusion of continuity, a single you stretching across days, years, decades. But beneath that label, everything keeps changing. Your thoughts rearrange themselves. Your body renews. Your beliefs drift. Each morning, you reboot into a slightly altered version, built on the memory of the last one. You still answer to the same name because the mind needs that fiction to function. It's comforting. It keeps the story running smoothly. Imagine a computer that updates itself every night. You wake up to version 37.0, new code, same name. The software tells you it's the same system, but the functions aren't quite identical. Some old files are gone, others rewritten. The shortcuts you used yesterday don't always work. The device keeps assuring you you're still you, because that's how the interface is designed. The human mind does something similar. It integrates the new data, what you've seen, felt, or learned, and folds it into a coherent identity. You don't notice the reboot because consciousness hides the updates under routine. The day begins, and you call it continuity. Think about how you react to the person you were a few years ago. You might read an old message or look at an old photo and feel a strange distance. You remember writing the words or posing for the picture, but you don't feel identical to that person. You might even cringe, wondering, why did I think like that? Or how could I have cared about that? Yet you still call that person me. It's a form of politeness toward your own history. You extend your identity backward out of habit. It keeps your story neat, even though you secretly know the connection is thinner than it seems. The body itself refuses to stay constant. Most of your cells are replaced over time. The skin you touch, the blood that moves through you, the lining of your organs, all rebuilt according to new blueprints. The brain renews its connections too, strengthening some, pruning others. Every new experience leaves a mark. Rewiring tiny circuits that shape how you think and feel. The result is subtle but total. You become a new configuration every day, carrying only the memory of past versions. When you say, "I'm the same person," it's a practical shorthand, not a truth. Memory tricks you into believing in sameness. It compresses time and fills in gaps so the story feels smooth. You don't remember every step of the path that led you here, only the highlights. The missing details are patched with assumptions. I must have always been like this. The self depends on that illusion. If you remembered every small change, you'd feel like a stranger to yourself. Continuity is an emotional need, not a factual one. You use memory the way an artist uses glue, to make fragments hold together long enough to believe in the picture. Social life reinforces this illusion. Other people need a consistent version of you to interact with. They expect you to behave, speak, and respond in ways they recognize. You maintain that consistency for their comfort and your own. It becomes a kind of performance, not dishonest, but stabilized. You keep playing the role of you, refining it each day, updating the script with small changes no one notices. The performance isn't fake, it's necessary. It allows communication to happen without everyone constantly reintroducing themselves. You present version 37.0, and they treat it as the same software they knew yesterday. But sometimes the updates are too big to hide. A sudden loss, a shift in belief, a moment of revelation. These changes alter your operating system. You wake up feeling different, and the old name feels strange in your mouth. You might say, "I'm not myself lately," as if the self were a uniform you misplaced. What you really mean is that the latest version doesn't fit the old story yet. You haven't synced the data. It takes time to adjust the name to the new shape. Eventually, the narrative catches up, and you feel whole again. The cycle continues. Think about childhood. At 5, you believed in simple rules and safe boundaries. At 15, you broke them. At 25, you tried to rebuild them. At 40, you questioned why you ever cared about rules at all. Yet each of those selves claimed ownership of the name. They all said, "I am me." If you met your younger self today, you might not agree on anything. You might even argue. Still, both of you would share the same identifier. That word becomes a bridge between incompatible people. The one you were, the one you are, and the one forming quietly for tomorrow. Technology has made this idea more literal. Every photo, post, and message preserves a snapshot of your older versions. They stay frozen online while you move on. Scroll far enough back and you'll see dozens of older selves. Confident, uncertain, naive, hopeful, all wearing your name. The internet never forgets, even when you do. You might cringe at those fragments, but they're proof of the ongoing update cycle. They show how many different people have shared your name. The ship of Theseus asks whether an object rebuilt piece by piece remains the same. The answer depends on whether you care more about the structure or the continuity of function. A ship that sails under the same flag feels like the same ship, even if the wood has changed. You are built the same way. The flag is your name. You sail under it each day, even as the planks are replaced. It gives you the illusion of being whole, of being one continuous self. The absurdity isn't that you change. It's that you keep pretending the name makes it all the same vessel. There's something quietly funny about this ritual of constancy. You wake up, say your name, how each day, repeat your routines, and assume the story continues. Each day, you start from a slightly different configuration, but the label stays fixed. It's efficient, maybe even necessary. The world would be chaotic if everyone admitted how fluid they are. But sometimes, in a rare moment of stillness, you notice it. The small gap between yesterday's self and today's. The difference is invisible but real, and you smile at the absurdity of it. All these versions, endlessly updating, all pretending to be one.
Memory feels like a recording, something we can replay to confirm what happened. We like to think it's faithful, that it captures truth. But memory doesn't work that way. It edits, reshapes, and fills in blanks. Every time you remember something, you change it. The act of remembering is also an act of inventing. The mind doesn't retrieve a static file. It recreates a scene, rebuilds emotion, and reinterprets meaning using what you know now. Memory isn't the past preserved. It's the past rewritten in the language of the present. Think about how you tell a story from your life, maybe a vacation, a breakup, a moment of pride. You repeat the story a few times over the years. The first version is raw and uncertain. Later versions become smoother, sharper, more organized. You emphasize some details, drop others. You find a rhythm that makes the story sound right. After a while, the version you tell feels more real than what happened. If you tried to recall the original event without words, you couldn't. The narrative has replaced the memory. You didn't mean to distort it. You just shaped it to fit meaning. Memory wants coherence more than accuracy. Science supports this. Each time you recall an event, your brain reactivates the neural pattern that stores it. During that reactivation, the memory becomes flexible, open to change. New details can slip in unnoticed, a sound that wasn't there, a phrase you wish you'd said, a face that looked kinder than it was. When you store it again, the edited version overwrites the old one. Over time, the edges blur and the story evolves. The emotion stays, but the facts drift. You end up remembering what feels true rather than what was true. This happens in small ways every day. You might argue with a friend about how a conversation went. You're sure they said something cruel. They're sure they didn't. Both of you remember honestly, but your minds stored different versions. Yours emphasize hurt, theirs focused on defense. Each memory preserves emotion, not dialogue. The mask of memory protects the feeling while altering the facts. It's not deceit, it's survival. The brain prioritizes the lessons of experience, not its transcripts. You can see this most clearly in childhood memories. Think about one you've held onto, a favorite room, a moment of fear, a parent's voice. You remember colors, light, sound. Yet if you visit the place or talk to someone who was there, you realize your image doesn't match reality. The walls weren't blue. The voice wasn't soft. The sequence of events was wrong. Still, your version feels more authentic than the corrected one. That's because your memory holds meaning, not measurement. It remembers how it felt to be there, not what it looked like. Photographs complicate this. When you look at an old picture, you think you're remembering, but you're actually replacing your original memory with the photograph. The image becomes the memory. You recall the picture more easily than the moment itself. Over time, the visual reference overwrites the sensory one. People often believe they remember things they've only seen in photos. The memory feels genuine because it's attached to real emotion, even if the source is secondhand. The mask becomes indistinguishable from the face. The ship of Theseus lives in this problem too. Each time you recall a memory, you replace one of its planks. After enough revisions, none of the original parts remain, but you still call it the same memory. The shape persists, so you trust it. You tell yourself the story has stayed intact, even as it has been rebuilt piece by piece. That's the illusion of remembering. Continuity built from substitution. Sometimes memory's invention is kind. It softens pain. You remember a hard year as easier than it was, a fight as less cruel, a goodbye as more peaceful. The edits protect you from the full weight of experience. They let you carry the past without being crushed by it. People call this nostalgia, but it's really the mind's mercy. The past becomes survivable through distortion. The edges are blurred to let you keep walking forward. Other times, the invention traps you. You might remember being the villain in a story when you weren't, or believe you were loved when you weren't. Memory can create comfort or guilt from the same event, depending on what version you've chosen to keep. Two people can share an experience and walk away with opposite truths. Years later, they'll each swear by their memory, unaware that they've both built something new from the same raw material. It's not only individuals who do this. Families, nations, and cultures build shared memories through collective invention. We remember stories that fit who we want to be, not who we were. We highlight victories, minimize failures, edit out contradictions. The collective memory wears a mask too, shaped by repetition until it feels like history. But history, like personal memory, is a story under constant revision. It isn't about accuracy, it's about identity. Think of memory like a stage set. The backdrop looks permanent from the audience's view, but behind the curtain, props move, lights change, and the scene resets for each act. You play your role, believing the set is stable, because that belief helps you make sense of the performance. The mask of memory gives structure to chaos. It lets you say, "This happened to me," even when this has changed with every telling. You can test this by trying to remember something without using words, to recall the raw image. Smell or sound. What comes back is hazy. Language has rewritten the scene too many times. The story you tell about the moment has replaced the sensory record. Memory has become mythology, shaped by the needs of the present self. When remembering, you aren't retrieving the past, you're reinterpreting it through the lens of who you are now. It's strange, but also human. The mask is how we preserve a sense of continuity. Without it, the past would be unbearable noise. Each recollection is a small act of creation, an update to the archive that keeps the story livable. You don't remember to preserve what was, you remember to make sense of what is.
Change is easy to recognize after it happens, but impossible to notice while it's unfolding. You look back and see distance between who you were and who you are. The shift feels sudden, but it wasn't. It took shape in small, invisible movements, in the spaces between choices, routines, and realizations. The person you are becoming lives in those quiet intervals. You rarely see it forming because you're too close to it. Transformation doesn't announce itself. It hums beneath the surface until one day it becomes visible. Think of how night turns into morning. There isn't a single point where darkness becomes light. The sky changes molecule by molecule, almost imperceptibly. You can't say, "Now it's day." You can only look back and realize it happened. The self evolves in the same way. Between moments of clear decision are stretches of stillness, where subtle shifts take place, thoughts rearranging, values adjusting, perspective softening. You don't feel them happening. You only notice when something familiar no longer fits, and you sense that you've already crossed over. You see this pattern in memory. Try recalling a version of yourself from 5 years ago. The differences are obvious. How you spoke, what you wanted, what you feared. You can list the events that marked that period, but the real change didn't occur in those milestones. It happened in the spaces between them. The evenings when you thought you were standing still. The moments you were too tired to think about growth. Change hides in ordinary repetition. You wake, work, eat, rest, and in the background, the machinery of the mind rewires itself quietly. Consider how habits form. You don't decide one morning to become disciplined, patient, or kind. Those qualities develop in small acts that don't look like progress. A single skipped distraction, a calm response, a word held back. Each moment seems minor, but together they accumulate. The self that results is built from micro decisions, not grand gestures. The you between moments is where these invisible steps take place, the gap between impulse and action, where intention starts to shape character. The ship of Theseus fits here too. You replace one plank, then another, but the ship keeps sailing. It doesn't stop mid-ocean to declare the change. Only after years of maintenance does someone realize no original part remains. The process is slow, constant, and unnoticed while it's happening. The same principle holds for people. You replace thoughts, memories, and beliefs one at a time. You stay afloat by keeping motion steady. Then one morning, you wake up and realize you've been rebuilt. You call it maturity, recovery, or transformation, but it was all happening quietly. Between the moments you thought nothing was happening at all. There's a reason change feels like loss before it feels like growth. Between who you were and who you're becoming lies an empty space. The mind resists it because emptiness feels unsafe. You try to fill it with plans, distractions, explanations, but that space is necessary. It's the pause where old patterns dissolve and new ones haven't yet formed, like soil lying fallow before planting. The in-between needs silence to prepare for something new. You can't rush it and you can't see it. You just have to stay present long enough for the next version of yourself to take shape. Imagine moving to a new city. The first few weeks, everything feels foreign. You miss familiar streets, the sound of your old apartment, the way light hit your kitchen at a certain hour. You tell yourself you haven't adjusted yet. But in the quiet hours, while making coffee, unpacking boxes, learning new routes, the adjustment begins. One day, without realizing it, you stop comparing. You start calling the new place home. The change didn't happen in one clear moment. It happened in hundreds of unnoticed ones that blurred together into belonging. Psychologists call this liminal space, the threshold between two states. It's where the old identity dissolves, but the new one hasn't solidified. You pass through these thresholds many times, between jobs, relationships, roles, or beliefs. They're uncomfortable because they lack definition. You can't describe who you are while inside them, but that's their function, to suspend identity long enough for something new to form. The you between moments lives in these thresholds, always transitioning, never quite settled. Even the body understands this rhythm. Every cell has its own cycle of death and renewal. The skin you wear today wasn't here a few months ago. You don't notice the turnover because it's gradual. You think of yourself as one continuous body, but it's a procession of replacements. The self mirrors this process. Old ideas shed, new ones grow. The constant activity of becoming is hidden behind the illusion of sameness. You stay recognizable, but you're never static. You can feel this most clearly in conversation. There are pauses between words, small silences where meaning gathers. The mind fills those gaps automatically. But that's where understanding forms. The same happens inside you. The pauses between your experiences are where understanding grows, when the noise fades and the mind starts connecting what it's seen. You call it reflection, but it's more instinctive than that. The quiet spaces organize the chaos. They make sense of the fragments. Sometimes you become aware of this process in rare moments, sitting alone, driving at night, standing in a familiar place that suddenly feels strange. You sense that something inside you has shifted. You can't name it yet, but it's there. You're standing between what has ended and what hasn't begun. The moment feels still, but underneath, the current moves fast. That is the you between moments, the silent witness to your own becoming. We're taught to focus on outcomes, on decisions made, goals reached, transformations visible to others. But most of life unfolds in the unseen transitions between those points. Growth isn't a single event, it's an accumulation of subtle adjustments. You rarely notice yourself changing because the process hides behind continuity. Every version of you exists in the space between what was and what's next. The shifts are constant, the silence steady, and the motion invisible. If you could slow time down enough, you'd see it, the gradual rewiring. The imperceptible exchange of oneself for another. You'd see how much of your life happens between the moments you measure. The spaces that seem empty are full of quiet construction. That's where the next version of you takes shape. One thought, one pause, one breath at a time. There comes a point when self-improvement begins to blur into self-erasure. You start by wanting to heal, to grow, to do better. You read books, set goals, build new habits. You say you're rebuilding yourself. But after a while, you start to notice a strange distance between who you were and who you've become. The repairs that were supposed to make you stronger have made you unrecognizable. You can't tell if you've improved or if you've replaced yourself completely. That's the rebuilder's dilemma, the quiet confusion that comes from trying to fix yourself into someone you no longer know. The desire to rebuild often begins with something painful, a loss, a failure, or a moment when your old self stops working. You look at the pieces of your life and decide to start over. You take what's broken and try to turn it into something better. But rebuilding isn't the same as repairing. Repair brings things back to their original form. Rebuilding creates something new using the remains of what came before. The problem is that you still call it you. You keep the same name, the same face, maybe even the same routines, but inside, you've restructured the foundation. The new version runs differently. Think about the ship of Theseus again. Replace one plank and it's still the same ship. Replace all of them, and the question becomes harder to answer. The same happens when you work on yourself. You fix your habits, shift your priorities, change your beliefs, and call it progress. But at some point, the collection of new parts no longer resembles the old you. You've become a new structure carrying the same label. You tell people, "I've changed," but what you mean is, the person you remember isn't here anymore. Self-help culture tells us that change is always good. It praises constant growth, constant optimization, constant upgrading, but there's a cost to endless rebuilding. When you're always fixing yourself, you start to treat the self as a problem instead of a person. You see flaws everywhere. You forget that imperfection isn't failure, it's continuity. The moment you believe you need to rebuild completely, you begin to discard parts that were never broken, just human. You sand away softness in pursuit of strength. You mistake reconstruction for healing. Imagine someone recovering from heartbreak. At first, they rebuild to survive. They find new routines, new interests, new confidence. The process feels healthy. But then the rebuilding doesn't stop. They become obsessed with becoming better. They reject every trait that reminds them of their past self. Their vulnerability, their openness, their capacity to trust. In protecting themselves from pain, they remove the very qualities that made them capable of love. They've fixed themselves until the person who loved and was hurt no longer exists. They are healed, but also gone. Psychology offers a clue to why this happens. The self isn't one thing. It's a system of stories, behaviors, and emotional patterns that adapt to circumstance. When you change one part, the rest responds. Fixing a single behavior can ripple through the entire identity. For example, learning to set boundaries might change how you relate to family, which changes how you see love, which reshapes how you define kindness. Each improvement reorganizes the whole structure. That's good, until the structure no longer feels familiar. The rebuild succeeds technically, but emotionally, you've lost your sense of self. People experience this after big life transitions. Someone retires after decades of work and tries to rebuild into a new purpose. Another ends a long relationship and tries to reinvent themselves from scratch. The rebuilding feels productive at first, but underneath, there's grief. The old identity, even if limited or painful, was still home. When you lose it, there's a strange emptiness. You've built a better version, maybe even a happier one, but you can't find the same intimacy with it. It's like waking up in a renovated house that smells like paint instead of memory. There's also the problem of perfection. When you start fixing yourself, it's easy to believe there's a final form, a version of you that will finally be complete. You picture a self without anxiety, without doubt, without contradiction. But the closer you get, the less human it feels. You end up constructing a self that's efficient but sterile, smooth on the outside, hollow on the inside. The rebuilder's dilemma is realizing that in trying to eliminate every flaw, you've erased the texture that made you real. Sometimes rebuilding happens quietly, without any grand plan. You change jobs, move cities, or start a new routine, and the old you slips away piece by piece. One day you hear your own voice in a conversation and realize it sounds different. You say things you wouldn't have said before, and you don't know when that shift began. You tell yourself it's growth, and maybe it is, but growth doesn't always feel like progress. It can feel like loss dressed up as improvement. The you who tried, failed, and cared is gone, replaced by someone more composed but less connected. There's a fine line between healing and hiding. Fixing yourself can be a way to avoid sitting with discomfort. You replace pain with productivity. You rebuild so you don't have to feel. You tell yourself you're evolving, but sometimes you're just running away with better tools. Real change happens slower. It doesn't require total reconstruction. It asks for patience, to live with the cracks instead of sealing them too quickly. In the end, rebuilding yourself always creates distance from who you were. That's part of being alive. Every version of you is a new construction, built on the remains of the last. The dilemma isn't whether to rebuild or not. It's how to rebuild without forgetting what you're made of. If you fix everything, you risk losing the blueprint. You become a stranger who carries your name, a person built from intention, but missing the mess that made you human. The real challenge is to build forward while leaving space for the person you once were to breathe inside the walls.
Loss draws the outline of what we value. You don't always see what matters until it's missing. The mind focuses on what's gone, tracing its edges, remembering how it once filled space. What stays behind starts to take meaning from what's no longer there. The shape of absence becomes part of the structure of living, a negative space that reveals form through contrast. Without it, you wouldn't recognize what endures. Think of a photograph after someone important is gone. The image stays the same, but your eyes move differently. You notice small details you once ignored: the tilt of a smile, the way light touches their hair, the background you never looked at. The person's absence changes how the picture feels. It doesn't erase them, it frames them. The loss doesn't remove meaning, it gives it dimension. You begin to see that memory is shaped by contrast, presence defined by its own echo. You feel this in everyday life. When you move out of a home, the rooms feel larger after the furniture is gone. Space that was once invisible becomes visible again. You realize how much of your life had been arranged around those objects. The path from chair to window, the view from the kitchen sink. Absence draws attention to structure. It shows you how the small things held the whole together. When you walk through the empty rooms, you understand the place more clearly than you ever did when it was full. Emotional loss works the same way. When someone leaves, the routines built around them remain like ghost patterns. You still set 2 plates out of habit. You still reach for your phone at a certain hour. The mind hasn't caught up to reality yet. Over time, the habits fade, but the outline stays, a faint shape of where they once fit. It's not just grief, it's geography. The emotional landscape rearranges itself around what's missing. You navigate by the space they left behind. The ship of Theseus echoes here too. As parts are replaced, the ship continues sailing, but the original pieces are gone. Its identity becomes a question of absence, of what's missing and what's endured through replacement. You live through the same paradox. You lose people, places, moments, and even parts of yourself. Yet life goes on, bearing the name you. The person sailing is built from loss as much as survival. The ship's shape is defined not just by what remains, but by the outline of what's been taken away. Imagine holding a favorite mug that is cracked. You glue it back together and keep using it, but you feel the fracture under your fingers each time you lift it. The break changes how you experience it. You're more careful now, more aware of its fragility. The crack doesn't ruin it, it reminds you of its story. Loss often works like that. It doesn't always destroy what it touches. Sometimes it exposes the texture of value, the awareness that things can end. The absence becomes part of the object, inseparable from its meaning. In relationships, absence reveals connection. You might not realize how much someone shaped your daily rhythm until they're gone. A silence at dinner, an empty side of the bed, a message that never arrives. Each small void outlines their influence. Over time, those outlines soften, but they never vanish. The absence becomes familiar, even grounding. It's a strange kind of continuity, presence through memory, contact through echo. You stop trying to fill the space and start living alongside it. Memory preserves absence differently than presence. Presence fades because it's replaced by new experience. Absence lingers because it's unfinished. The mind keeps circling it, trying to complete the picture. That's why grief doesn't obey time. It's not the pain of what happened, but the tension of what can't happen anymore. The shape of absence resists closure. It reminds you that life is built from incompleteness, that not every thread ties neatly. You can feel the same effect in smaller ways, when a friendship drifts, when a place you loved changes, when a version of yourself fades. The space left behind carries quiet information. You notice what defined that period of life by the holes it left. The absence becomes a teacher. It shows you what mattered without the noise of presence. It points to the pattern that made meaning possible. Artists understand this instinctively. In painting, empty space, negative space, gives balance and tension to what's visible. The white of the canvas defines the form of the figure. In music, silence between notes gives rhythm shape. Without the pause, the sound has no structure. The same principle governs emotional life. The spaces left by loss create rhythm, the quiet that gives meaning to what continues. You can't build wholeness without emptiness. You can't know presence without its opposite pressing gently against it. Sometimes, absence is self-created. You step away from someone, change direction, or let go of a belief that once defined you. The loss feels deliberate, but it still leaves a hollow. The shape it leaves becomes a kind of reminder, a boundary that marks growth. You can measure how far you've come by the things that no longer occupy your days. Absence becomes a record of evolution, proof of the versions of yourself that no longer fit. In quieter moments, you might feel the presence of absence as something almost physical, a pause in conversation, a corner of a room that seems to hold memory. You sense it without seeing it. The mind fills the empty space with feeling, and the feeling becomes a kind of form. That form doesn't go away, it just settles, softens, becomes part of the background. You carry it forward as part of your texture, like a shadow that moves with you but no longer weighs as much. Life keeps rewriting itself through loss. Every ending redraws the shape of what remains. The outline of absence defines the boundaries of presence. The people, places, and moments that disappear don't take meaning with them. They leave it behind, etched in negative space. What's left isn't emptiness, but form, a quiet record of what once stayed the world.
You can feel it happening slowly. One day, you start talking like the people around you. You pick up their words, their rhythms, their opinions. You change the way you describe things, not because you mean to, but because it feels easier to belong that way. The boundaries between what you think and what you've absorbed start to soften. It's subtle, like ink spreading through water. You don't notice the moment it begins, only the point where everything starts to look slightly the same. That's what an identity leak feels like. Not a collapse, but a quiet blending of self with everything that touches it. Identity seems solid when you describe it. You say, "I know who I am." You list preferences, values, experiences, stable words, always, never, forever. But identity is fluid, more like a current than a container. It shifts with the environment, the people, the pressures around it. When you move through the world, small pieces of you rub off, and other people's pieces stick. You adapt constantly, smoothing your edges to fit the spaces you move through. Over time, those adjustments pile up until it's hard to tell which parts belong to you and which came from elsewhere. Consider how language shapes this. When you spend time with someone, you start mirroring their speech patterns. You use their phrases without realizing it. This is mimicry at work, a built-in human mechanism for connection. It makes conversation flow, but it also makes boundaries porous. You start to think through their words, and words shape thought. Soon, your opinions, humor, even tone of empathy shift slightly to match the people you spend the most time with. It's not imitation, it's osmosis. The mind doesn't just listen, it absorbs. Technology amplifies this. Online, you're surrounded by curated fragments of identity, pictures, captions, ideas. You scroll, and each one leaves a trace. Over time, those traces layer into your sense of self. You start liking what you've seen liked by others. You shape your expression to fit the format. The caption length, the rhythm of trends, the tone that gains approval. The boundary between self and environment thins further. You think you're expressing yourself, but you're also performing for a system designed to shape that expression. You leak into the feed, and the feed leaks back into you. There's a psychological term for part of this: introjection. It describes how we take in the voices, beliefs, and expectations of others and make them feel like our own. A parent's disapproval, a teacher's praise, a partner's opinion, they all settle inside the mind and start speaking in our voice. Over years, they blur with authentic thought. You believe you're acting from conviction, but sometimes you're echoing someone else's idea of who you should be. It's not deception, it's conditioning. The self becomes a collage of borrowed voices, stitched into coherence. The ship of Theseus returns here too. If you replace enough of your inner planks, your beliefs, habits, and tastes, are you still the same person? You call yourself by the same name, but how much of the original structure remains? Each change feels small, justified, natural. You adapt to survive, to belong, to grow. But identity leaks through these small openings until you can't locate where you ends and the influence begins. Maybe that's inevitable. Maybe identity was never meant to be sealed. You can see this most clearly in relationships. When you fall in love, you start merging lives, schedules, habits, dreams. You share language, inside jokes, emotional reflexes. Over time, your edges soften around each other. The leak becomes mutual. You pick up their calmness or their chaos, their optimism or doubt. You trade mannerisms without realizing it. When it ends, you notice what's missing. Not just the person, but the parts of you that existed only with them. You don't go back to who you were. You rebuild with traces of what you shared. The leak leaves a mark. It happens in work too. In every job, you adapt to the logic of the system. The organization has a personality, cautious or bold, hierarchical or flat. You start mirroring it. The way you write emails, make decisions, or even think about time changes. The self molds to fit the structure. When you leave, it takes months to reassert your own rhythm. You find yourself saying phrases that only make sense in that context. That's how deep the leak goes, into your speech, your stress patterns, your sense of what counts as success. There's a cost to too much blending. When the leak spreads unchecked, you start to lose track of preference. You hesitate when asked simple questions. What do you want? What do you believe? The answer depends on who's asking. The self becomes adaptive but hollow, a mirror that reflects whatever stands in front of it. You function well in social terms, but privately there's confusion. You can't tell whether you like something because it resonates or because it's familiar. The boundary that once separated self from environment has worn thin. Yet, there's also a strange comfort in this blur. Complete individuality can feel lonely. When your edges dissolve a little, you connect more easily. You feel part of something larger, a community, a rhythm, a shared way of being. The leak lets empathy flow both ways. The danger is not the blending itself, but forgetting it's happening. When you mistake adaptation for authenticity, you lose the ability to choose which influences to keep. You can test the leak by stepping away. Go somewhere quiet. No screens, no voices, no noise of expectation. After a few days, you notice how much falls away with silence. Certain thoughts stop echoing. Certain opinions feel lighter. What remains, the voice that still speaks after the others fade. That's the part least affected by the leak. It's smaller than you expect, but it's real. That's the core you rebuild from, the version that belongs only to you. The edges of identity will always blur, with time, with contact, with change. You can't stop the leak, but you can watch it. You can learn its pattern. You can notice how every interaction leaves a faint trace, how every silence restores some clarity. The self isn't a sealed container, but a breathing membrane, letting things in and out. The trick isn't to close it, it's to know what you're letting through. You spend your life meeting yourself in fragments. Some versions you recognize, others feel foreign. Each change comes quietly, almost politely, until one day, you realize you're standing in front of a stranger who carries your name. You've changed your mind, your habits, your tone. The old reactions don't fit anymore. You still look the same, but something inward has shifted. The strange thing is that you don't remember the moment it happened. You just woke up one day and met another you. Change never feels sudden while it's happening. It hides in the small details. The way you now pause before speaking. The way you no longer chase certain people. The way you think before reacting. It's a slow replacement of instincts. Then, when the right situation appears, you realize your response is new. The stranger reveals themselves through your own behavior. You don't plan these meetings. They arrive naturally, as if the self renews itself in cycles, discarding one skin after another. Think of the first time you revisited a place that once meant everything to you. You expected nostalgia, maybe comfort. Instead, you felt distance. The place hadn't changed much, but you had. You stood there trying to summon the feeling that used to live in that space, but it wouldn't come. The version of you that once belonged there had gone. You could remember them, even picture what they would have felt, but you couldn't bring them back. The gap between memory and presence showed you the constant stranger, the quiet evolution that made you unfit for your own past. Psychologists talk about the narrative self, the story we tell ourselves to stay coherent. It links past, present, and future into one continuous person. But beneath that story lives another kind of self, the experiencing self. It's immediate, shifting with every new emotion, every small encounter. You live through this experiencing self day by day, and it doesn't always match the story you've written. The tension between them creates the feeling of estrangement. You're attached to the story, but life keeps introducing new characters that look like you. The ship of Theseus lives inside this paradox. Replace every plank, and it's still called the same ship. Replace every memory, belief, and desire, and you still call it the same person. The name stays constant, even as the structure evolves. The continuity comforts you. But when you look closely, you see it's only a story you keep telling to connect the versions that no longer overlap. The self you meet now is built from the fragments of all the others, their habits, their lessons, their losses, but it's not identical to any of them. You can sense this in language. The phrases you used to use sound foreign now. You hear recordings of your old voice and flinch at the tone, the confidence, the confusion, the youth. It doesn't sound like you, though you know it is. That voice belonged to someone who thought differently, felt differently, and carried a different kind of hope. When you listen, you meet the constant stranger again, not as an intruder, but as a reminder that you've been many people, all passing through the same body. Relationships make this visible. Someone from your past may reach out after years apart. They remember a version of you that no longer exists. They speak to that person, expecting the same rhythm, the same humor. You respond politely, but the conversation feels out of sync. They're talking to your old coordinates. The stranger inside you answers instead. They might say, "You've changed," as if it's a surprise. But how could you not? Time doesn't pass without leaving fingerprints. The real surprise is that they expected you to stay still. There's also the quiet version of this, meeting yourself in reflection, not memory. It happens when you face decisions you once thought you understood. You realize your values have shifted. What once felt certain now feels open-ended. You think, I used to be so sure. You meet the constant stranger in those moments of doubt. The stranger doesn't contradict you. They continue you. They show that growth isn't a straight line. It's a spiral that keeps returning to the same questions, each time from a different angle. Sometimes, the meeting happens under stress. Crisis strips away the layers of identity you built for safety. You respond instinctively, and what surfaces surprises you. Strength where you expected fear. Anger where you expected calm. Compassion where you thought you'd be indifferent. You meet a version of yourself that only exists under pressure. You might not like them, but they're real. The stranger isn't always welcome, but they're always honest. They show you what lies beneath the version you present to the world. Technology amplifies the strangeness. Your digital past keeps older versions of you alive. You scroll through old posts, messages, photos. Each one feels familiar but distant, like reading letters from someone who used to live in your skin. You recognize the handwriting, but not the thinking. The archive traps these versions in amber, so you can watch your evolution play out on a screen. The constant stranger lives there too, a reflection that keeps reminding you that you've never stayed the same for long. Meeting yourself again and again isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it feels like betrayal. You mourn the old you, the one who believed certain things, trusted certain people, loved without fear. You think of them with tenderness and envy, but even as you miss them, you know you couldn't be them again. You carry them forward as memory, not identity. Every new version is built on their remains. The stranger you become is the heir to all those unfinished versions, learning from their mistakes and forgetting their limits. If you think about it, the idea of a fixed identity has never made sense. The self is a process, not a possession. It rebuilds itself through contact, time, and loss. Each day, you shift slightly to fit the life you're in. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. The constant stranger is the evidence that change doesn't need permission. You meet them in mirrors, in silence, in the way you speak to others. They don't erase who you were. They keep you moving through the versions that make up the whole. The paradox is that you remain recognizable even as you change. People still call you by the same name. You still remember your stories. But every moment you adapt, the stranger inside you breathes a little more. You meet them quietly, again and again, as time does its work, not to replace you, but to remind you that identity isn't something you hold. It's something you keep discovering.
You think of yourself as whole, like a woven fabric, strong, complete, continuous. The threads hold together through repetition, your routines, your name, your habits. You believe those threads form something stable, something you can point to and call me. But identity doesn't stay fixed. It's held together by tension, not permanence. When you start to pull at a single strand, question a belief, lose a role, change direction, the weave loosens. The shape you thought was solid begins to unspool. The unraveling isn't violent, it's quiet, slow, almost graceful. You don't notice it until the familiar pattern starts to fall apart in your hands. It often begins with something small. Maybe you stop agreeing with something you once defended. Maybe you wake up one morning and feel detached from the life you built. It's not a crisis at first, just a flicker of distance, but that distance grows. You watch yourself from the outside, noticing the gap between what you say and what you feel, between the person you show and the one whispering beneath the surface. You start tugging gently at that loose thread, wondering what else might change if you follow it. The self depends on stories. You tell yourself who you are through a sequence of memories and explanations. You build coherence out of fragments. I'm the kind of person who. becomes a kind of scaffolding. But the moment you challenge one part of that story, the others begin to move. Pull one sentence and the paragraph shifts. Change one belief and the logic of the whole identity starts to tilt. The self isn't a fortress, a tapestry of small, interlocking assumptions. Once you start unweaving, it's hard to stop. You can see this in moments of transition. Someone loses a job that once defined them. Another leaves a long relationship, moves cities, changes language or faith. Each of these shifts pulls a major thread from the pattern. Without that structure, they're left staring at loose ends. They might say, "I don't know who I am anymore." But that's not quite true. They do know. They just don't know who they are without the threads that used to bind their days together. The unraveling feels like loss, but it's also exposure. You start seeing what identity was made of. The ship of Theseus fits here too. Replace one plank, and it's still the same ship. Replace enough and you begin to wonder what's left of the original. When you pull one psychological thread, a role, a value, a habit, the surrounding structure starts to reorganize. Eventually, nothing of the old pattern remains, but you keep sailing under the same name. The body continues, the memories remain, but the person within has shifted beyond recognition. The paradox is that the unraveling often feels like honesty. The fabric comes apart, but the thread itself, raw and unpatterned, feels real. Sometimes the unraveling is forced. Grief, illness, or failure tears through the fabric before you're ready. You lose something you thought you couldn't live without, and suddenly the version of you that depended on it collapses. The roles that made sense, parent, partner, believer, achiever, no longer fit. You're left holding pieces, trying to remember how they once fit together. For a while, you mistake the unraveling for destruction. Then slowly, you realize it's also clarity. Without the weave, you can finally see the individual threads. You understand what your sense of self was built from. How much of it was choice, how much was imitation, how much was fear. You experience smaller versions of this every day. You act differently at work than at home. Softer with one person, sharper with another. Each role adds and removes threads. Most of the time, you weave them together seamlessly, pretending they belong to one whole. But sometimes the seams show. You hear yourself speak and realize you don't believe what you're saying. You catch a thought that doesn't sound like yours. You look in the mirror and feel a half second of disorientation, like you're meeting your reflection for the first time. That flicker of unfamiliarity is a glimpse of the unraveling, the quiet proof that the self is stitched together moment by moment. Even memory participates in this. When you recall the past, you rebuild it. You change details, reinterpret motives, reshape outcomes. Each recollection replaces a thread with a slightly different one. Over time, the pattern shifts. You look back and feel both recognition and distance. That was me, but not me. Memory preserves the outline, but alters the texture. You keep the shape of the person you once were, but the material is constantly replaced. The self you remember and the self you live aren't identical. They're parallel versions woven from different times. Language keeps the fabric intact. Words like I, me, and mine act like knots, tying together fragments that would otherwise drift apart. Without language, the self might dissolve completely into experience, sensations, impulses, perceptions without ownership. But the knots hold just enough tension to maintain coherence. You can feel this when you meditate, or when you lose track of time doing something absorbing. The boundaries fade, the you in the sentence softens. For a moment, experience happens without identity. The mind slips free of its own weave. Then, as soon as you think, I feel peaceful, the knot tightens again. The fabric reforms. Relationships mirror this tension. You become a different version of yourself with each person. You take on their rhythm, their tone, their expectations. When someone leaves, that version of you leaves too. You might feel like a part of you has died, but really, it's the configuration that no longer has a place. The thread connected to them becomes loose, waving in open air. Over time, you reattach it elsewhere, and the pattern changes again. That's how identity survives, by unraveling and reweaving continuously. There's a strange freedom in watching it happen, when you stop fighting to stay whole. You see how natural the unraveling is. The self isn't breaking, it's breathing. Each pulled thread makes space for something new to be woven in. The fear comes from thinking you're supposed to stay intact, but maybe you were never meant to. Maybe the sense of me isn't a finished design, but a living fabric, always fraying at the edges, always finding new ways to hold together.
You don't leave your past selves behind as cleanly as you think. They travel with you, folded into the way you speak, the way you hesitate, the way you decide what matters. You might have outgrown their beliefs, their fears, their goals, but they linger. You carry them forward like old code running quietly in the background. You're built on them, even when you try to forget them. That's the inheritance of change, the way transformation never erases what came before. It just buries it under new layers. Think about how you react to criticism. Maybe now you handle it calmly, but underneath, there's still the echo of the younger version of you who took every comment as a personal failure. You've changed how you respond, but not the fact that the old instinct still stirs. Growth doesn't delete the original pattern, it learns to override it. The past selves you've been aren't gone, they've become part of your reflexes. Every change you make carries the residue of what came before it. People like to talk about change as liberation, the moment you become new. But change isn't a clean break, it's an inheritance. You evolve, but you inherit habits of thought, language, and feeling from who you were. You can sense it when you try to act differently. You say something with confidence, but a quieter part of you still waits for the old outcome. You feel the echo of someone who no longer exists, but who still shapes your timing, your tone, your guard. That's how identity sustains itself through change, by carrying traces that don't belong to the present version of you. It's easiest to notice this after major turning points. You leave a relationship, a job, or a version of life that no longer fits. You tell yourself you've moved on, but months later, you hear a certain song or smell something familiar, and an older self surfaces. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. That person still lives in your memory, watching through the cracks. They have no power now, but they exist. They are proof that every version of you continues to exist somewhere in your system, even if you no longer identify with them. The ship of Theseus captures this perfectly. As the ship's planks are replaced one by one, it remains the same vessel in name, but it carries the ghost of the earlier versions. Each new plank depends on the structure built before it. The identity of the ship is an inheritance, not a constant. The same is true for you. Every time you replace a belief or rebuild a habit, you're adding a new plank onto a foundation built by past selves. You can't separate them completely because the new structure wouldn't stand without the old one. You can only carry them forward, reshaped, absorbed, translated. Memory holds the archive of those versions. You revisit them in dreams, in quiet moments, in sudden flashes of self-awareness. Sometimes they appear as shame, the person who said something thoughtless, who stayed too long, who gave up too soon. Sometimes they show up as tenderness, the person who tried their best with what they had. Either way, you carry them. Memory doesn't fade as cleanly as we hope. It reorganizes. You don't lose the past, you reinterpret it. That reinterpretation becomes part of who you are now. You inherit your own edits. There's also the physical inheritance. Your body remembers stress and comfort. Muscles tense the same way they used to when you're under pressure, even if the threat is gone. You flinch from tones of voice that belong to people long out of your life. The nervous system stores the history of every version of you that needed to survive. When you change, those reflexes don't vanish, they adapt. You carry them as muscle memory, a physical reminder of who you were trained to be. The body keeps the map, even when the traveler has moved on. You see this inheritance in how people talk about themselves after growth. Someone says, "I'm not that person anymore," but they still tell the story with a trace of defense, as if they need to prove it. Another says, "I've changed," but their eyes soften when they describe who they used to be. There's always a tension between gratitude and rejection, wanting to thank the old version for getting you this far, but also wanting to outgrow them completely. Change requires both impulses, the will to move forward and the grace to carry what can't be left behind. In quieter ways, you can feel this inheritance in the gap between who you are in public and who you are alone. Outwardly, you act as the current version, composed, mature, contained. But in private, flashes of the old selves return. The way you hum a tune you used to love. The way you think in the voice of a younger you when you're afraid. The mind slips between timelines. It doesn't choose one identity. It holds them all like overlapping transparencies. Each layer shows through faintly, shaping the tone of your present life. Sometimes, the inheritance feels heavy. You carry guilt, regret, or unfulfilled ambition from earlier selves. You look back and wonder if you could have turned out differently. But those weights aren't separate from you. They're the raw material that growth used to build something new. The person who made those mistakes gave you the perspective that prevents you from repeating them. You inherit their errors the way a tree inherits the roughness of its bark, not as punishment, but as structure. There's another kind of inheritance too, the one passed through others. The people you've known, loved, and lost leave impressions that outlive the relationships themselves. Their gestures, phrases, and values seep into you. You carry pieces of their ways of thinking, their humor, their fears. Some of it stays buried, some becomes visible when you least expect it. The inheritance of change isn't just personal, it's collective. Every shift in you reflects someone else's influence, even if they're long gone. Change isn't a clean exchange, one self replaced by another. It's accumulation. You keep layering, revising, and absorbing until the new shape feels natural. But beneath that surface lives the record of everything you've ever been. You might not fit your old selves anymore, but they built the room you now stand in. You carry them forward, not as burdens, but as foundations. Each version hands the next a small inheritance, a lesson, a reflex, a way of seeing. You grow on top of their work, always carrying what no longer fits, because that's how continuity survives inside change. Change doesn't always announce itself. It slips in through small acts, a word you stop using, a thought you no longer defend, a silence you let linger instead of filling. You keep speaking your life as if the grammar hasn't shifted, but it has. You're translating yourself as you go, sometimes into a language that no longer fits the shape of what you meant. The result is subtle distortion, not wrong, but off by a beat. You recognize yourself, but not entirely. That's what it means to live through translation. Each new version of you says the same thing differently, and every change slightly mispronounces who you were before. You can see this most clearly in memory. Think of an old journal entry or message you once wrote, something honest from a younger you. You read it now and feel a mix of recognition and distance. You remember the feeling, but the voice feels foreign. The words don't sound like yours anymore. They carry the same intention, but the rhythm has changed. It's like hearing your own sentence spoken with an accent you didn't know you had. The meaning remains, but the tone has drifted. That's the nature of self-translation. The old version of you speaks, and the current version interprets. Some nuance gets lost along the way. Language itself changes the self. When you switch the words you use, when you describe pain as a lesson instead of a failure, or call yourself in transition instead of lost, you're not just updating vocabulary, you're rewriting identity. Each phrase carries a frame of meaning. The self adjusts to the words it lives inside. When the vocabulary changes, so does the person. You've seen this when someone moves to another culture or adopts a new way of speaking. They don't just gain new words, they shift perspective. What they call things changes what those things are. The translation doesn't just describe life, it transforms it. It's not only linguistic. Emotional translation happens every time you tell a story from your past. You take something raw and reshape it to make sense in the present. You soften details, change tone, replace confusion with hindsight. You turn chaos into sequence. In doing so, you mistranslate the experience slightly, but also make it bearable. The pain that once defined you becomes narrative instead of identity. Yet even as you retell it, the original feeling lingers beneath, untranslated, private, still vivid. The story and the experience coexist, both true, but in different dialects of the self. Relationships are fluent in this kind of mistranslation. You present yourself differently to each person, adjusting tone, pacing, openness. Over time, each connection carries a unique version of you. When those people remember you, they remember the person they knew, a translation shaped by context. Then, when you meet them again years later, you find yourself trying to fit back into that version. But you've changed languages since then. The phrases that once worked feel clumsy now. You can't fully translate the current you into the grammar of the past. The other person senses it too. You both talk, but something no longer lines up. The conversation is fluent, but not exact. A meeting between translations that no longer share a native tongue. The ship of Theseus follows the same logic. Replace every plank, and the ship keeps its name, its function, its story. But if you could hear it speak, it would sound slightly different each time. The ship translated itself with every repair, pronouncing its identity in new materials, new tones. The self does this daily. You rebuild constantly. New habits, new values, new frameworks. Each replacement subtly changes the pronunciation of who you are. The name stays the same, but the meaning shifts. You're the same ship only because you keep repeating the same story. Technology adds another layer. Online, you translate yourself for an invisible audience. You compress complex feelings into captions, refine thoughts into fragments that fit. You use shorthand that fits the platform, the tone of the feed, the rhythm of trends. Over time, this filtered version of you becomes fluent in a dialect that doesn't match the one you use alone. When you scroll back, you see a version of yourself you curated to be legible, not necessarily true. That's a translation too, the self edited for public understanding. It's honest in intent, but flattened in form. The gaps between who you are and how you appear widen quietly, line by line. Even silence can mistranslate identity. When you stop explaining yourself, when you withhold the story, others fill in meaning on their own. You become a symbol of their interpretation. They read your quiet as peace, or pride, or guilt, depending on their need. You no longer control the translation. The self becomes text in someone else's language. This is why misunderstanding stings so deeply, not just because you're misread, but because it reminds you how fragile self-expression is. Every attempt to define yourself risks distortion. There's a gentler side to this. Translation keeps you moving. It allows you to change without collapsing. When old beliefs fade, you find new language to express what remains. You reinterpret, rename, reframe, not to hide from change, but to survive it. Translation is what lets identity stay continuous, even as the meaning behind it evolves. You might not be the same person you were 5 years ago, but you can still tell your story as if you are. You keep the thread by speaking it into coherence, one translation at a time. Still, there's always loss in translation. Each time you explain yourself, even to yourself, something slips away. Tone, texture, intention. The inner experience never fits perfectly into words. You approximate, and in that approximation, a little of the original gets left behind. Over time, the accumulation of these small losses creates distance between who you were and who you recall being. You live surrounded by your own mispronunciations, close enough to understand, but never exact. When you think about it, living is a process of rewriting. Every decision, every conversation, every realization adjusts the meaning of the self slightly. The translation never stops. You can't return to the original language, the one spoken by the person you were before you learned too much, or lost too much, or loved too deeply. That language is gone, replaced by new rhythms, new meanings, but the echoes remain, like an accent that memory can't erase. Every change you make mispronounces who you were, but that's how you keep speaking at all. Not perfectly, but enough to be understood by the version of you still learning to listen.
You don't notice the rebuilding at first. It starts after something ends. A loss, a failure, a quiet unraveling of what once felt certain. The person you thought you were breaks in places you didn't expect. For a while, you try to patch the cracks, to hold the old structure together. But at some point, you realize it's gone. The version of you that made sense no longer stands. What comes next isn't restoration, it's reconstruction. The slow work of building a self from fragments that survived. Rebuilding doesn't begin with vision, it begins with debris. You sift through what's left, old habits, memories, instincts, and try to see what can still bear weight. Some pieces surprise you with their strength, others crumble when touched. You learn by trial which parts of your old architecture belong in the new design. The process isn't about nostalgia, it's about honesty. You don't rebuild what used to be. You rebuild what can stand now. Every identity is built from layers: belief, memory, emotion, story. When those layers collapse, you face a strange silence. You wake up and feel hollow, not because nothing's left, but because the shape that held you together has changed. People tell you to find yourself, as if the self were hidden under the rubble, waiting to be uncovered. But it's not buried, it's being made again, in real time. Reconstruction isn't about recovery, it's about creation under constraint. You build with what remains. Imagine a city after a storm. Some buildings survive, others stand half-broken, their structures exposed. The work of rebuilding doesn't start with grand plans. It starts with clearing space, salvaging materials, and redrawing foundations. That's what happens internally when your old identity falls apart. You examine your emotional architecture, the pillars of meaning, the scaffolding of belief, and realize how much was built for a past that no longer fits. You keep what still holds, but you design differently now. You've seen where it failed. Sometimes the collapse comes from within. You outgrow a life you built with care. It doesn't fall because of tragedy, but because of time. What once felt right begins to feel narrow. You wake up inside a pattern that no longer fits your shape. The soul, if we can use that word simply, begins to press against its own walls. The reconstruction starts not from destruction, but from expansion. The quiet decision to step into space you haven't yet filled. Change asks you to rebuild, not because everything broke, but because you've become too large for what once held you. The ship of Theseus fits this idea too. Each plank replaced, each belief updated, each emotion rewritten. You're still the same vessel in name, but the materials are new. You might keep sailing the same waters, but your weight, your balance, your sound against the wind have changed. Rebuilding the soul is like that. You can't return to the old version. You can only move forward, plank by plank, until you no longer resemble the original ship, yet still call yourself by the same name. Memory complicates this work. It keeps handing you blueprints from the past, saying, "It used to look like this." You try to fit them over your new design, but the measurements don't align. The rooms are smaller. The doorways are narrower. What you used to believe about yourself no longer fits the way you live. So you adapt. You let the old plans fade. You learn to build without certainty, guided instead by intuition, by what feels stable underfoot now, not what once stood tall. The process isn't clean. Reconstruction leaves visible seams. You can see where the new material meets the old. You can hear the slight difference in tone between what survived and what's newly built. Some days you mistake those seams for weakness, but they're proof of endurance. They show that you didn't vanish when everything changed. You adapted. The cracks aren't evidence of damage. They're evidence of work done by hand, of rebuilding without a map. You can watch this happen in the smallest of ways. After heartbreak, you learn to speak differently. You use fewer absolutes. You listen more before responding. The change isn't loud, but it rewires how you connect. Or after failure, you stop defining yourself by outcomes and start measuring by effort. The soul reconstructs itself around new definitions of value. You don't decide these things consciously. They grow naturally out of the ruins. The rebuilding is patient, often invisible, but it continues whether you notice or not. Sometimes reconstruction feels like imitation at first. You go through motions, unsure if they belong to the new you. You repeat what used to work. The old habits, the familiar ways of being, just to stay moving. Slowly, though, you start replacing instinct with intention. You speak less from reflex and more from choice. The architecture begins to take its own shape. You look around one day and realize the new structure has been standing for a while. It's different, but it's steady. There's beauty in how uneven the rebuilding is. Not every part returns at the same time. Some corners of the self stay unfinished. Still open to air, you carry both completion and incompletion at once. That contrast is what makes the reconstructed soul more flexible. It doesn't pretend to be whole. It accepts that strength comes from openness, from the willingness to keep reworking the design as you live. In art restoration, conservators often leave visible marks of repair instead of hiding them. They believe the cracks tell the truth about the object's life. Identity works the same way. The reconstructed self isn't seamless, it's honest. The lines of repair show where you broke and where you learned. They make you readable, real. What you call soul isn't a fixed essence. It's an architecture under constant revision. Each rebuild leaves traces of the last, forming a structure that's both ruin and refuge. You live inside that architecture, rebuilt, still shifting, still learning how to hold itself up. The ruins of who you were don't disappear. They become part of the foundation, buried under new rooms, carrying the weight of every change that came after. What stands now isn't the same as before, but it's made from everything that survived the fall.
Continuity is a story you tell yourself. You wake up each day, call yourself by the same name, and trust that the person moving through the world is the same one who went to sleep the night before. You rely on that story to keep things stable. Without it, life would feel unstitched, a string of unrelated moments, each inhabited by someone slightly different. The mind resists that idea. It prefers fiction to chaos. It believes in sameness because sameness is easier to live with. The illusion works through repetition. You act like yourself, so you remain yourself. You repeat familiar gestures, how you greet someone, how you think about your work, how you interpret silence. Each repetition strengthens the thread, connecting one version of you to the next. It doesn't matter that your thoughts, cells, and circumstances keep changing. The story remains, and the story holds you together. Belief becomes structure. The ship of Theseus lives quietly in this idea. The ship's planks are replaced one by one until nothing original remains. Yet everyone keeps calling it the same ship. They do so out of habit and trust. The name persists because it feels practical to keep it. You do the same thing with identity. Every few years, your memories shift, your habits evolve, your opinions turn. Still, you use the same name, the same pronouns, the same signature. Continuity becomes a choice, an act of faith disguised as fact. Consider the way memory edits itself. You look back on an old experience and fit it neatly into the story you tell about who you are now. If the details conflict with your current self-image, you smooth them out. You remember yourself as more consistent than you were. The fiction rewrites the evidence. A child who is shy becomes thoughtful. A mistake becomes a lesson. The act of remembering turns into translation, and the translation becomes identity. You believe you've stayed the same because memory keeps adjusting its shape to fit that belief. There's comfort in this continuity. It anchors you. If you thought too hard about how much you've changed, you might lose your footing. The person who once loved certain songs, defended certain ideas, or dreamed of a certain future no longer exists, but their story lives on inside you. You carry their name, their narrative, their unfinished business. Believing in continuity allows you to move forward without grief for every version of yourself that's gone. Sometimes, though, the fiction becomes visible. You catch a glimpse of an old photo or reread something you wrote years ago. You recognize your face or your words, but not the person behind them. You feel like an observer, not a participant. For a moment, the story cracks. You see how fragile the connection is, how belief alone stitches the pieces together. Then you turn the page, take a breath, and the fiction resumes. It's not denial, it's adaptation. You can't live while constantly questioning whether you're the same person who began the day. The story holds because you need it to. Language reinforces the illusion. The word I works like glue. It lets you connect every thought, every feeling, every action under one symbol. You say, I was there. I remember. I will. The single pronoun collapses time, turning all your different selves into one continuous subject. It's efficient, but inaccurate. The I that remembers isn't the same I that experienced, yet the sentence hides that gap. The fiction of sameness is built into grammar. You can't speak without sustaining it. Relationships depend on this same continuity. People expect you to stay recognizable. When you change too much, they don't know how to respond. They rely on the story of you they've memorized, so you adjust. You act like your old self to keep the peace, even when it doesn't fit anymore. You perform consistency for their comfort and eventually for your own. The belief spreads between you like shared mythology. You all agree that the story still makes sense, so it does. In work and routine, the fiction deepens. You show up as the version of yourself that knows what to do, how to behave, how to think. Even when you feel different inside, the environment cues the familiar performance. The old patterns take over, and you move through the motions as if identity were stable. The structure of daily life protects the illusion. It provides context that keeps the story intact. You're the same person because the world around you expects you to be. This belief doesn't erase change. It hides it under continuity. Like an actor who plays the same character across decades, you age into your role. You adapt your lines, adjust your gestures, that never drop the part. The story remains consistent because you refuse to let it end. The persistence of fiction isn't deception, it's survival. You build coherence from repetition, the way a city rebuilds on the same foundation after every fire. Still, there are moments when the story falters. A sudden loss, a new city, a change in language or love. Something disrupts the narrative. You no longer recognize the version of yourself reacting. You say, "I don't know who I am anymore." What you really mean is that the old fiction stopped working. The structure that kept the story believable has collapsed. The work of identity begins again, not from truth, but from imagination. You start writing a new continuity, piece by piece, until it feels real enough to stand on. Even science reflects this paradox. The body replaces nearly all its cells over time. The brain rewires connections with every new experience. From a physical perspective, you are not the same being you were a decade ago. Yet memory and language stitch these changes together so seamlessly that you can't feel the replacements happening. You live in a moving organism, convinced of its own stillness. The persistence of fiction keeps life coherent. It allows you to wake up and recognize the reflection in the mirror, even when the person inside keeps evolving. Believing you're the same doesn't make it true in any absolute sense, but it makes it real enough to live by. The fiction endures not because it's perfect, but because it's necessary. You keep calling yourself by the same name, and in doing so, you stay whole. You think of staying the same as stillness. You imagine it as holding steady while everything else moves. But staying yourself isn't about standing still. It's about changing at the right speed to keep balance with what changes around you. The self doesn't remain fixed. It adjusts quietly, replacing small parts to stay recognizable. What you call staying true to yourself is a form of constant renovation, identity reworked to match a shifting world. You can see this in how you respond to time. Every new experience demands a small correction to your sense of who you are. You take in information, face conflict, form new habits. Each adjustment shifts the shape of the self slightly. If you ignored those changes, you'd fall out of sync with your own life. You'd become someone frozen, out of place in your own timeline. The paradox of staying is that the only way to remain yourself is to keep rebuilding. The ship of Theseus shows this tension perfectly. A ship at sea stays seaworthy because it keeps replacing its planks. The captain might say, "We've kept her whole," but what he really means is, "We've kept her changing." Identity works the same way. You can only stay intact through substitution. Every version of you borrows structure from the last. You call it consistency, but it's maintenance. The work of staying continuous while nothing remains the same. Think about how you hold on to your values. They feel like anchors, fixed, reliable. But even values evolve. What honesty or kindness meant to you at 15 doesn't mean the same now. You've learned new edges, new limits. You've translated ideals through experience. The core feels unchanged because you keep rewriting the meaning to fit your present life. Staying yourself doesn't mean clinging to old definitions. It means updating them so the language of your identity still makes sense. Relationships reveal this most clearly. When you've known someone for years, you both change, but the bond endures through adaptation. You keep learning new ways to fit each other. If one person stops changing, the connection frays. It's not the differences that end relationships, it's the refusal to evolve with them. The same applies internally. If you insist on being who you were, you lose alignment with who you are. The self stays alive by adjusting to its own evolution. The idea of authenticity often confuses this. People talk about being authentic as if it means preserving a fixed essence. But real authenticity is flexibility, the ability to express what's true now, even if it contradicts what was true before. You're not betraying yourself by changing your mind or growing beyond an old identity. You're maintaining coherence by keeping the expression of self aligned with current truth. Staying yourself requires permission to become different without apology. Memory makes the illusion of sameness stronger than it is. You look back and feel a continuous thread, but that thread is built from selective recall. The mind edits inconsistencies, smooths transitions, fills in blanks. You remember feeling like one person because it's simpler that way. But if you could replay the past without narration, you'd see constant revision. Each phase of life has its own vocabulary, its own tone, its own logic. The self is more like a long translation project than a static portrait. What holds it together isn't permanence, it's rhythm. Routine reinforces this rhythm. The way you wake up, the way you eat, the way you move through a day, all of it gives continuity, shape. You return to patterns that feel familiar, and those patterns convince you that you haven't changed much. But you have. The comfort of repetition hides the quiet evolution underneath. You respond differently within the same structure. You might follow the same schedule, but the mind behind it isn't identical to last year's or even last month's. There's a psychological term, equilibrium, that fits this well. Systems maintain stability not by resisting change, but by regulating it. Your body does this with temperature, your mind with identity. When something in your environment shifts, you adjust internally to stay balanced. It's not resistance, but response. Remaining yourself follows the same logic. You adapt to maintain a sense of continuity. You stay the same through movement, not immobility. Sometimes you feel this process more directly, during loss, transition, or recovery. When life changes too fast, you struggle to update the narrative. You feel fragmented, as if parts of you haven't caught up. Over time, though, the system stabilizes. You rebuild meaning around what remains. The act of staying becomes a form of reconstruction, not preservation. The self settles into a new shape that still feels like home, even if the floor plan has changed. Language traps the paradox. The word still has two meanings: to stay motionless and to continue. When you say, "I'm still me," it sounds like you haven't moved, but it actually means you've continued being yourself despite the change. Continuity isn't stillness, it's persistence. You keep going, and that motion carries identity forward. The paradox is built into the grammar of living. To stay, you must move. You can see this in nature too. A river stays a river, not because its water never changes, but because its movement never stops. Each moment, the current replaces itself. Yet you recognize the same shape, the same sound, the same flow. That's what selfhood looks like in motion. Continuous transformation that maintains form through fluidity. You can't separate the staying from the changing. They depend on each other completely. In smaller ways, this happens each day. You adjust tone depending on who you speak to. You shift roles between work, family, solitude. Each change is minor, but together they create a living flexibility. The self stretches and returns, always reforming to fit the context. You might think of this as inconsistency, but it's actually resilience, the ability to adapt while keeping your sense of identity intact. That balance between continuity and renewal is what staying really means. Even the moments that feel like stillness, rest, silence, reflection, are forms of movement turned inward. The mind reorganizes, integrates, redefines. You emerge slightly altered, better able to face what comes next. Every pause is part of the process of remaining whole. Staying yourself isn't a refusal to change. It's the decision to keep rebuilding the meaning of you every time life asks for an update. Remaining the same requires constant transformation. It's not a contradiction. It's the only way the story of self continues. You stay by learning how to move. You persist by learning how to shift without losing the thread. Each change refines the version of you that can survive the next. The paradox isn't failure, it's design. You don't preserve the self by keeping it still. You preserve it by letting it move with time, rebuilding its edges as the world keeps changing around it.
Most of what changes in you doesn't announce itself. It happens in quiet spaces, in the background of routine, in the pauses between thought and action. You wake up each day thinking you're mostly the same, but somewhere inside, something subtle has shifted. A small belief loosens, a reaction softens, a sense of certainty fades. It's not dramatic. It's slow and almost invisible. The self keeps evolving even when you aren't watching. That's the shadow continuum, the silent current of change that shakes you without asking for attention. You can feel its presence in hindsight. You look back a few years and notice that your priorities, your patience, your sense of what matters have all changed. You didn't plan it. You didn't set goals for it. The growth happened in the spaces between choices, through repetition, fatigue, love, loss, or simple time passing. The transformation wasn't a decision. It was an accumulation. The shadow continuum moves like that, quiet, patient, constant. It's different from the kind of change you talk about. Public change is loud. It's about decisions, milestones, resolutions. It's the kind you can name. But private change is harder to detect. It's built from thousands of tiny recalibrations. How you hold your body when you're anxious, how quickly you forgive, how you describe yourself in conversation. These shifts rarely feel important on their own. Yet together, they rewrite the architecture of the self. You see this when you revisit an old habit that used to define you. Maybe you once thrived on conflict, or chased attention, or depended on validation. You find yourself in a familiar situation now, expecting to react the same way, but something inside stays still. You no longer crave the same outcome. You've changed, but not consciously. A shadow continuum has done its work quietly, reshaping instinct through time and repetition until your behavior rewrites itself. Psychology calls part of this process implicit learning. It's what happens when you absorb patterns without noticing. You don't decide to change. Your mind updates automatically through experience. It's how you learn to navigate relationships better, or recognize what peace feels like, or understand what's worth keeping. The mind practices without your permission. The result is gradual maturity, not from epiphany, but from endurance. The ship of Theseus fits this pattern. The ship never transforms all at once. Each repair happens separately, unnoticed in the moment. A new plank replaces an old one. A rope gets tightened. A sail gets patched. The crew doesn't wake up one morning and declare, the ship is new. They just keep sailing, maintaining, adjusting. Years later, every part has been replaced, and yet it feels the same. The ship's identity survives through quiet maintenance. You do the same with yourself. Each small act of adaptation adds up until the person standing in your skin is not the one who began the journey, but still carries the same name, the same memory of continuity. This unseen evolution is most visible during stillness. When life slows down, during solitude, recovery, or reflection, you notice the faint outlines of who you've become. It's not always comforting. Growth can make you feel like a stranger in your own mind. You catch yourself responding differently to things that once defined you. The silence that used to feel heavy now feels necessary. The company that once excited you now drains you. The shift is subtle, but real. It's proof that the self has been rewriting itself quietly while you were busy surviving. Even emotion follows this continuum. You don't wake up one morning free from grief or fear. You simply realize, one day, that it doesn't carry the same weight. The feeling has faded through countless small moments, distractions, conversations, new experiences. You didn't conquer it, it eroded naturally. Emotional growth often hides in daily repetition. Each act of continuing, even when nothing feels different, is part of the silent reconstruction. Memory can't always keep up with this process. You might recall yourself as more fragile or more certain than you are now. The image you carry of your past self lags behind the present. This is why you sometimes feel disconnected from your own story. The mind is still catching up with the self that's been changing in silence. The shadow continuum moves faster than awareness. You can only see it after it passes. Relationships evolve under the same rule. You grow around each other, often imperceptibly. You adapt to new patterns, learn to listen differently, argue more softly, or drift apart without deciding to. People rarely break all at once. They outgrow each other in silence. By the time they notice, the change has already completed itself. The distance isn't sudden, it's cumulative. The same happens internally. You outgrow old beliefs, expectations, and dreams in slow motion. The separation feels sudden only because you finally noticed it. Technology gives you snapshots of the shadow continuum. Old messages, photos, or posts reveal versions of yourself you no longer recognize. You scroll through them and wonder when exactly you changed. The difference feels vast, but there's no clear dividing line. The person in those images didn't vanish overnight. They faded into you gradually, replaced one quiet moment at a time. The past self still exists, but as sediment, layers of what you've carried forward without realizing. Even the body participates. It repairs, replaces, regenerates. You shed skin, rebuild tissue, form new neural connections. You become physically new without ever noticing. The biology mirrors the psychology, quiet, continuous reconstruction beneath the surface. The self, like the body, stays alive through invisible maintenance. There's a reason this kind of change feels peaceful once you learn to trust it. You realize that growth doesn't need to be loud to be real. The self doesn't depend on reinvention or declaration. It depends on the steady hum of adaptation, the quiet adjustments that happen when you're not looking. You're always becoming, even when you feel still. The shadow continuum keeps you moving forward without demanding attention. It's the pulse beneath daily life, the unseen rhythm that turns passing time into transformation. You don't direct it, but you live through it. Every thought revised, every feeling softened, every choice made differently adds to its motion. You are carried by it, reshaped by it, and sustained by it. The silent evolution that never stops, the self that changes without ever disappearing.
There's a moment that comes after change, when you've adjusted enough to move through life again, but not enough to feel at home in it. You act like yourself. You speak like yourself. People treat you as though you're unchanged. But beneath the surface, something no longer fits. You carry the memory of who you were like an outfit that's slightly too tight, familiar but not quite right. The mirror still recognizes you, but you don't fully recognize the reflection. You're both the same and not the same. That's the feeling of the familiar imposter. It often appears after quiet shifts, not dramatic reinventions, but subtle ones. You stop enjoying things that used to fill you. You let go of certain routines, certain people, certain ambitions. The external world doesn't register the change right away. You still play the role that fits the old pattern, yet inside, the tone has changed. What used to feel natural now feels performed. You go through motions that used to be instinct and realize you're acting out your own past. The ship of Theseus fits here again. You've replaced enough planks to become a different vessel, but you're still sailing under the same flag. People see the name and assume it's the same ship. You do too, until you look closely and realize that the wood no longer matches your memory of it. You keep moving forward, but part of you feels like a placeholder, carrying the old name until the new identity fully settles in. You might notice this most when someone from your past reaches out. They talk to you like they always did, expecting the same responses, the same rhythm. You try to meet them there, to speak the old language, but it feels translated now, like you're pretending fluency in something you've forgotten. The conversation flows, but the connection doesn't land in the same place. You realize you've drifted further than you thought. To them, you're unchanged. To yourself, you're a version in disguise, similar enough to pass, different enough to notice. Memory deepens the confusion. It preserves your earlier selves with too much clarity. You can still recall what it felt like to be that person, the way they thought, what they feared, how they hoped. Those memories don't fade, they coexist. When you draw on them, you can still feel that version of you moving inside. That's what makes the imposter feeling so uncanny. You don't lose the old you completely. You carry them as a voice that still sounds like yours. You just can't follow their logic anymore. You see the same paradox in recovery, from loss, from burnout, from heartbreak. You rebuild, but the new structure doesn't feel stable yet. You've changed in ways others can't see. You're calmer, or more detached, or less easily moved. You know this version of you is earned, but it feels temporary, like a performance you hope becomes real. When people tell you, you seem like yourself again, you smile, knowing it's only half true. You seem like yourself because you've learned to mimic your old shape while becoming something else entirely. Even small growth creates this distance. You outgrow beliefs, but still use their vocabulary. You adopt new habits, but your instincts haven't caught up. You feel both forward and backward at once. A self in transition, rehearsing familiarity. The imposter feeling isn't deceit. It's the awareness that identity updates slower than experience. You've already changed, but your language, relationships, and reflexes haven't yet learned the new version. In psychology, this resembles what's called discontinuity awareness. It's the moment you recognize that your sense of self is a narrative, not a fixed point. You see the edits and rewrites in real time. It's disorienting, but also honest. You're aware that your story about who you are is slightly out of date. That awareness can feel like imposture, as if you're faking consistency to keep the story intact. But it's not falseness, it's maintenance. You're keeping continuity alive while the material underneath shifts. This happens in quieter spaces too, in how you think about purpose, love, or faith. You still use old words, but they mean something new. You still chase similar goals, but for different reasons. The shape of your life looks familiar, but the meaning has changed. You can feel it.
when you revisit an old dream and realize you no longer want it, but still feel guilty for letting it go. The dream is part of your identity's scaffolding, even if the purpose has disappeared. You carry it out of habit, not hope. The familiar imposter shows up most when life stabilizes after chaos. You survived a difficult season, made it through, and people say you're back to normal. But normal isn't what it was. The experience rewired something: patience, perspective, pace. You return to old places, but move differently within them. You can blend in, but you no longer belong there fully. You've adapted to your own evolution. Technology gives this feeling a strange mirror. You scroll through photos of your past selves, smiling, posing, writing captions that no longer fit your tone. You remember what that person felt like. You still look like them, but your thoughts don't match their expressions anymore. It's not embarrassment, it's recognition. You see how much you've changed, but the world can't tell the difference. To everyone else, you're continuous. To yourself, you're translated. Even your body participates. You carry old scars, muscle memory, and reactions learned from years ago. The body performs familiarity long after the mind has moved on. You might walk into a place that used to make you nervous and feel your pulse quicken, even though the fear no longer makes sense. The body remembers for longer than identity does. It plays the role of who you were, like an understudy repeating lines you've outgrown. You can think of this feeling not as deception, but as transition. Change always arrives before understanding. The new version of you exists, but you haven't fully inhabited it yet. You live between selves for a while, the old one recognizable, the new one unfinished. The imposter feeling isn't failure, it's evidence of motion. You're still learning how to sound like yourself again after change. And in that space, where everything familiar feels slightly misaligned, you meet the strange truth of identity. You never stop being yourself, but you never stay the same either.
You don't notice replacement as it happens. It's too gradual, too precise. A thought softens, a habit shifts, a preference fades. You call it growth, maturity, or simply change, but what's really happening is a quiet exchange of parts. Something old leaves, something new takes its place. Over time, the pattern of replacements becomes so complete that the person who began the journey exists only as memory, yet you still feel whole. The continuity survives even when the materials don't. The ship of Theseus offers the clearest image. Each plank of the ship is replaced one by one until not a single original piece remains. Philosophers ask whether it's still the same ship. The answer depends on how you define identity, by substance or by story. The same question applies to you. Every few years, you shed layers of belief, taste, and instinct. Your body renews itself. Your memories edit themselves. You call yourself by the same name, but the self inside is a reconstruction. The continuity isn't physical, it's narrative. Replacement happens in silence. You can't feel a belief being swapped out. It doesn't break with sound, it erodes. Something that once felt permanent, an opinion, a certainty, a reaction, starts to lose weight. You respond differently to the same event and wonder when the shift began. Maybe it was a conversation months ago, or a disappointment that didn't fade, or a piece of information that refused to leave. One small change introduces another. The network of identity rewires itself without asking permission. Memory participates in the replacement too. You think of memory as storage, but it's closer to editing. Each time you recall an event, your brain rebuilds it, using new information and current emotions as material. The version of you in those memories changes along with the narrative. The more you revisit them, the more you rewrite them. The past becomes an evolving draft, not a record. The memory feels solid,
because the story stays consistent, even as its parts are swapped. Language reinforces the illusion of sameness. You use I as if it points to one stable thing, but it's shorthand for a moving target. When you say, "I used to love that," you're describing a different I, built from different assumptions and experiences. The sentence joins two versions of you under one name, smoothing over all the replacements in between. Grammar does the work of glue. You speak continuity into existence. You can feel the anatomy of replacement in small everyday acts. The song that once made you feel alive now plays in the background without effect. You taste something you used to crave and find it dull. You talk to someone you once admired and realize you no longer believe what they do. None of these moments are dramatic. They're quiet indicators of replaced parts. The pieces that used to define you have been swapped, so slowly that only contrast reveals it. Relationships reveal replacement most clearly. The way you love someone at the beginning isn't the same way you love them years later. The first version is built from curiosity and projection. Later, it's built from knowledge and acceptance. The emotion feels familiar, but its structure is new. You've replaced your understanding of love many times over, but you still call it the same thing. You stay loyal to the word, even as the meaning changes underneath. Work follows the same pattern. What you once did for ambition, you later do for stability, or for purpose, or simply out of habit. The motivation changes, but the action stays constant. This creates the illusion that you're still the same person pursuing the same goals, but the driver behind the behavior has been replaced several times. You've built new engines inside the same frame. Even the body mirrors this process. Most of your cells regenerate over time. The skin, the bones, the lining of your organs, all slowly replaced. The physical self you inhabit now is not the same one that began your memories. Yet you move with the same gestures, speak with the same voice, and carry the same name. The continuity feels real because the system maintains its pattern, even when its material changes. Technology shows another kind of replacement. You scroll through old photos and see faces that feel close but unreachable. You recognize the smile, the pose, the style, but not the thoughts behind them. You can remember that person's perspective only faintly. Their logic, their priorities, their private world, all replaced. You've carried the archive forward, but the original interpreter is gone. You become your own historian, piecing together meaning from artifacts left by a vanished version of yourself. Sometimes replacement happens faster. After loss, trauma, or major change, the world shifts too quickly, and you adapt out of necessity. You drop entire patterns overnight. What used to guide your decisions no longer applies. You don't rebuild consciously, you improvise. In those moments, you feel the gap. The space between who you were and who you've become. The transition feels like stepping into a new body that remembers an old name. Replacement doesn't always mean improvement. Some new parts are heavier. Some take away lightness you once had. Change is not always progress, it's movement. You trade one way of seeing for another, one version of self for the next. The anatomy of replacement isn't about loss or gain. It's about recognition. The understanding that identity is built from constant exchange. The quiet nature of replacement is what makes it invisible. You rarely notice the swaps until distance reveals them. Only when you look back do you see how completely the structure has changed. You realize that every version of you was temporary, serving its time before being quietly replaced. The self persists, not because its parts remain, but because its story keeps finding new ways to hold together.
There's a part of you that doesn't change. It doesn't speak, doesn't interfere, doesn't make decisions. It only watches. It's the quiet witness behind every version of you that's come and gone. When you change your habits, beliefs, or priorities, This part notices. It records without judgment, like a camera that keeps running while the scene shifts. You can feel it most clearly in rare, still moments, after an argument, before sleep, or while looking at something that used to matter but doesn't anymore. You sense the distance between the one who lives and the one who observes. The self that watches has no need for certainty. It doesn't panic when identity shifts because it has seen it happen before. It remembers all the other selves that have passed through. The teenager who dreamed too big, the adult who played it safe, the optimist, the skeptic. They've all stood where you stand now. The watcher holds them all, quiet and unchanging. You live through them one by one, but this deeper awareness stays. It's both comforting and unsettling to realize there's something in you that keeps watching while the rest keeps dissolving. It's unsettling because it makes you aware of your own impermanence. You can feel yourself becoming someone new, even as you watch the process unfold. You catch yourself reacting differently to the same situation and wonder, when did I start being like this? It's not a dramatic realization, more like noticing a shadow growing longer as the light changes. You understand that the person making choices now is not the one who would have made them before. The self that watches observes this shift like a scientist recording data, fascinated but detached. You might experience it when you look through old photos. You see your own face, the same eyes, the same features, but the expression belongs to someone else. You can't recreate what that person felt. You remember the moment, but not the mindset. The self that watches sees both, the image of who you were and the awareness of who you've become. It doesn't take sides, it just takes note. There's a strange awe in that kind of recognition, a mix of pride and distance. You realize you've been changing, even while believing you were staying still. This observing self doesn't exist as a single organ or function. It's more like a point of awareness that threads through every version of you. It's not trapped by the roles you play, the worker, the friend, the parent, the dreamer. It watches all of them take turns in the spotlight. When one role fades, it doesn't mourn. It simply adjusts focus. The watcher is the continuity you mistake for identity. The sense of I am belongs to it, not to the characters it observes. The ship of Theseus gives this shape. As each plank is replaced, someone has to notice the replacement. That someone is the witness, the consciousness that sees the changes happen in sequence. The ship can only remain itself because something keeps track of the transformation. You do the same. You watch beliefs fall away, habits form and break, people enter and leave, and yet you call it one life. The observer ties the timeline together, not because it resists change, but because it survives it. There's a quiet awe in noticing your own evolution. You can feel proud of growth and still mourn the person who had to disappear for it to happen. The watcher feels both emotions without trying to resolve them. It doesn't demand closure. It just sees. When you're honest with yourself, you can sense how many versions of you are layered inside. You might still think like an older version in certain moments. You might speak with their voice when you're tired. The watcher notices this overlap, the faint echoes of your former selves still moving through you. Sometimes this awareness feels like distance, even isolation. You can be in a room full of people, laughing, talking, and still feel a small part of you standing outside, watching the scene unfold. It's not detachment, it's perspective. The self that watches doesn't participate in the story. It observes the rhythm of thought, the rise and fall of emotion, the constant motion of becoming. It reminds you that even while you live inside the moment, you're also observing it from the edge. In meditation, this watcher becomes clear. You notice thoughts arriving and leaving. You feel emotions rise and fade. You realize you're not the thoughts or the emotions. You're the space that notices them. That realization can be calm or unnerving. It means that everything you call me, every belief, preference, or reaction is part of the movement being watched, not the watcher itself. The self that watches doesn't need to claim ownership. It just stays present. You can also sense it in moments of conflict. You might feel anger and at the same time notice the anger. You know you're angry, but another part of you observes the feeling unfold. That dual awareness creates a gap between impulse and action. It gives you room to choose. In that pause, you meet the watcher, the one who doesn't need to react, who only needs to see clearly. As you age, the watcher becomes more familiar. You stop trying to hold on to old versions of yourself. You see how each one served its purpose and then dissolved. You can remember them with compassion without needing to revive them. The self that watches collects them all, not as regrets or trophies, but as evidence of motion. Every change you've lived through has passed under its gaze. Every version of you has been both the actor and the observed. The uneasy awe comes from realizing that the observer never stops. It's there in joy and loss, in certainty and confusion. It's constant, even when everything else shifts. You can't escape it or define it fully. You can only notice that you've been noticing all along. That while your thoughts, hopes, and fears keep transforming, something silent has been watching, keeping you whole through every change.